She thought she was just defending her son. But in the blink of an eye, she found herself face to face with the most powerful man in town. A man who could ruin her life with one phone call, or change it forever. One heated confrontation in the school parking lot silenced him for now. But when whispers of a buried past and a shocking connection between them begin to spread, the fight for her son's safety turns into something far more personal and dangerous. As the truth inches closer to the surface, reputations, futures, and hearts are all on the line. What happens when the person you're fighting against might be the one who can save you? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Rachel's fingers ached as she balanced another heavy tray of breakfast plates. The morning rush at Mel's Diner was always intense, but today felt especially chaotic. Steam rose from plates piled high with fluffy scrambled eggs and crispy hash browns as she weaved between the crowded tables. "Order up for table 7, she called out, managing a warm smile despite her exhaustion. The familiar clink of silverware and buzz of conversation filled the air, mixing with the sizzle of bacon on the grill. "More coffee, hon?" Rachel asked an elderly regular, already reaching for the pot. Her movements were automatic after years of practice, even as her mind wandered to Ethan. He'd been so quiet lately, picking at his breakfast and avoiding her eyes. Something wasn't right, but he wouldn't talk about it. The diner's bell chimed as another group of customers walked in. Rachel glanced at the clock. 10:47 a.m. Just a few more hours until her shift ended. Her feet were already protesting in her worn sneakers. "Rachel!" Mel's voice cut through the diner noise. "Phone call for you. It's Ethan's school." Her heart dropped. She quickly set down the coffee pot and hurried to the back office, wiping her hands on her apron. School calls during the day were never good news. "This is Rachel Carter," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Mrs. Carter, this is Principal Harris's office. We need you to come in as soon as possible regarding an incident with Ethan." "Is he hurt? What happened?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Ethan is physically fine, but we really need to discuss this in person. How soon can you get here?" Rachel's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She found Mel in the kitchen, already waving her off before she could explain. "Go take care of your boy. We've got it covered here." "Thank you," Rachel said, quickly untying her apron. She grabbed her purse from her locker and practically ran to her old Honda in the back parking lot. The drive to Riverdale Academy seemed endless. Every red light felt like torture as scenarios played through her mind. Ethan was such a gentle soul. What could have happened? The school's marble columns and manicured lawns came into view, a stark contrast to their modest apartment building across town. The secretary led her straight to Principal Harris's office. Ethan sat in one of the oversized leather chairs, shoulders hunched, looking smaller than his 10 years. Her heart clenched at his expression, a mixture of shame and fear she'd never seen before. "Mrs. Carter, thank you for coming so quickly," Principal Harris said, gesturing to the other chair. His desk was immaculate, not a paper out of place. "We've had some concerning reports about interactions between Ethan and another student, Chase Whitmore." Rachel reached for Ethan's hand. It was cold in hers. "What kind of interactions?" "It seems there have been some unfortunate incidents over the past few weeks. Name, calling, exclusion from activities, some physical intimidation." "Bullying," Rachel said flatly. "You're telling me my son has been bullied for weeks, and I'm just hearing about this now?" Principal Harris adjusted his tie. "We try to let students work out their differences naturally when possible. However, today's incident in the cafeteria crossed a line." "What happened today?" Rachel squeezed Ethan's hand gently. "Chase knocked my lunch tray," Ethan whispered. "Everything spilled. Everyone laughed." Rachel's free hand clenched into a fist. "And where is Chase now? Where are his parents?" "Mr. Whitmore is a very busy man," Principal Harris said smoothly. "We've left messages about the situation. I assure you we'll handle this appropriately." "Handle it how, exactly?" Rachel leaned forward. "Because from what I'm hearing, this has been going on for weeks without any handling at all." Principal Harris's smile never wavered. "We take these matters very seriously, Mrs. Carter. We'll speak with both boys and their teachers. Perhaps some supervised activities together might help them find common ground." Rachel stood, still holding Ethan's hand. "That's not good enough. I want a meeting with Chase's parents and a clear plan for how you're going to keep my son safe at school. Of course, we'll do our best to arrange something. In the meantime, we'll keep a closer eye on the situation." The drive home was quiet. Rachel kept glancing at Ethan in the rearview mirror, but he stared out the window, lost in thought. "Why didn't you tell me, sweetheart?" she finally asked. Ethan shrugged. "I thought it would stop. And—" he hesitated. "I didn't want to worry you. You work so hard already." Rachel blinked back tears. Her brave, thoughtful boy trying to protect her when she should have been protecting him. That evening, she made his favorite dinner, spaghetti with extra meatballs. Their small kitchen table was barely big enough for two, but it was their special place for important talks. The sauce bubbled cheerfully on the stove as she set out plates. "Mom," Ethan twirled pasta around his fork without eating it. "Maybe I could go to a different school?" Rachel set down her own fork. "No, honey. You belong at Riverdale just as much as anyone else. We're not running away from bullies." "But Chase says people like us don't belong there. His dad's name is on the library, and our name isn't on anything." "Listen to me," Rachel said firmly, reaching across the table to touch his chin. "Our worth isn't measured by names on buildings. It's measured by how we treat others, by the kindness in our hearts. And you, Ethan Carter, have the biggest heart I know. What if he doesn't stop? Then we'll keep fighting the right way, with dignity and determination." She squeezed his hand. "I promise you, I won't let anyone make you feel less than the wonderful person you are. We'll figure this out together." Ethan managed a small smile, finally taking a bite of his dinner. "The meatballs are really good tonight. Extra garlic," Rachel winked, grateful to see a spark of his usual self. "My secret weapon." They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments before Rachel spoke again. "I want you to promise me something. From now on, you tell me everything, good or bad. No more keeping secrets to protect me. That's my job, to protect you. Deal?" "Deal." Ethan nodded, reaching for another meatball. Rachel watched him eat, her own appetite gone. She'd work another job if she had to, fight harder, do whatever it took. No one was going to dim her son's light. Not the principal, not Chase Whitmore, and certainly not his privileged father. The next afternoon, Rachel drummed her fingers nervously on her steering wheel as she waited in the pickup line at Riverdale Academy. Her conversation with Principal Harris yesterday still burned in her mind. The way he downplayed Chase Whitmore's behavior as boys being boys made her blood boil. Through her windshield, she watched the steady stream of luxury cars pull up: Mercedes, BMWs, Range Rovers. Her weathered Honda Civic stuck out like a sore thumb. But she held her head high, reminding herself that she'd earned Ethan's place here through hard work and determination. Movement near the school's entrance caught her eye. Greg Whitmore stood chatting with another parent, his perfectly tailored suit and commanding presence drawing attention from everyone who passed by. Rachel's heart pounded. She'd seen him at school events before, but had never spoken to him directly. "Honey," she said, turning to Ethan in the back seat. "Wait here for a minute, okay?" Ethan nodded, already absorbed in his book. Rachel took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped out of the car. The autumn air felt crisp against her face as she walked purposefully toward Greg. He was exactly as she'd imagined up. Close, tall, distinguished, with perfectly styled silver hair and an air of absolute authority. The kind of man used to people stepping aside when he walked down a hallway. "Mr. Whitmore?" Rachel's voice came out stronger than she expected. Greg turned, his expression barely masking his annoyance at being interrupted. "Yes?" "I'm Rachel Carter, Ethan Carter's mother." She met his gaze steadily. "We need to discuss your son Chase's behavior toward my boy." Greg's lips curved into a condescending smile. "Ah, yes. I heard about their little disagreement. Boys will be boys, Mrs. Carter. I'm sure you understand." Rachel felt her cheeks flush. "What I understand is that your son has been repeatedly bullying mine, pushing him in the halls, destroying his homework, making him eat lunch alone. Kids need to learn to handle their own problems," Greg said dismissively, checking his expensive watch. "The real world isn't going to coddle them." A small crowd of parents had started to gather, pretending not to listen while clearly hanging on every word. Rachel was acutely aware of their presence, but she pressed on. The real world? Rachel's voice rose slightly. The real world needs decent people who know right from wrong, who understand that strength isn't about pushing others down to lift yourself up. Greg's smirk wavered slightly. Listen, Mrs. Carter, I appreciate your concern, but perhaps you're out of your league here. Places like Riverdale Academy operate differently than what you might be used to. People like me? Rachel felt something snap inside. Years of holding her tongue, of swallowing her pride, of working double shifts just to give Ethan a chance. It all came pouring out. Let me tell you something about people like me, Mr. Whitmore. Her voice carried across the now silent parking lot. We teach our children that character matters more than bank accounts. That treating others with dignity isn't a sign of weakness. It's a measure of true strength. She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. Your son is learning from your example. Every time you dismiss his cruelty as normal, every time you act like money puts you above basic human decency, you're teaching him that it's okay to hurt people who can't fight back. Greg's confident expression had completely disappeared, replaced by something between shock and discomfort. Several parents nearby had stopped pretending not to watch. I work hard to give my son opportunities, Rachel continued, her voice thick with emotion. But more than that, I work hard to raise a good man, someone who'll stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. What kind of man are you raising, Mr. Whitmore? The silence that followed felt electric. Greg opened his mouth, then closed it again, for once at a loss for words. A few parents actually started clapping, quickly stopping when Greg shot them a sharp look. Rachel straightened her shoulders, suddenly aware of how many people were watching. Without another word, she turned and walked back to her car, her head held high through the windshield. She could see Ethan staring at her with wide eyes, his book forgotten in his lap. The walk back felt like miles, but Rachel didn't let her confident stride falter. She could feel Greg Whitmore's stunned gaze following her, along with dozens of other eyes. But for the first time since this whole nightmare began, she didn't feel small. She felt 10 feet tall. Rachel stood at her small kitchen counter, methodically chopping vegetables for dinner while the pasta water came to a boil. The events of the afternoon kept replaying in her mind. Her hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline from her confrontation with Greg finally wore off. The kitchen phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. She wiped her hands on her apron and reached for the receiver, already knowing who it would be. Tell me everything, Joanne's familiar voice demanded without preamble. I've already gotten 3 different versions from other parents. Did you really make Greg Whitmore speechless in the parking lot? Rachel couldn't help but smile as she cradled the phone between her ear and shoulder, returning to her cooking. Word travels fast around here, doesn't it? Are you kidding? It's all anyone's talking about. Sarah Jenkins said you gave him the verbal smackdown of the century. Joanne's excitement was contagious. Come on, spill. From the living room, Rachel could hear the soft sounds of Ethan doing his homework. She lowered her voice slightly. I just couldn't take it anymore, Joe. The way he stood there, so smug and condescending, acting like Ethan being bullied was somehow normal or acceptable. As Rachel recounted the confrontation, she found herself getting fired up all over again. And then he had the nerve to make some comment about people like me not understanding how things work at Riverdale Academy. Oh, no, he didn't, Joanne gasped. Oh, yes, he did. That's when I lost it. Rachel dumped the chopped vegetables into a pan, the sizzle of oil punctuating her words. I told him exactly what I thought about his attitude, and what it was teaching Chase about treating others. Good for you. Someone needed to knock that man down a peg or two. Joanne paused. Though I hope this doesn't cause problems for Ethan at school. Rachel's stomach tightened. She'd been trying not to think about potential consequences. Me too, but I couldn't just stand there and let him dismiss what Chase has been doing. Ethan deserves better than that. Mom? Ethan's quiet voice made her jump. She hadn't heard him come into the kitchen. Hold on, Joe. Rachel covered the receiver. Yes, honey? Ethan shifted from foot to foot, looking uncomfortable. Can I tell you something? Of course. Just give me 1 second. Rachel returned to the phone. Joe, I need to go. Ethan needs to talk to me. Call me back later, Joanne insisted before hanging up. Rachel set the phone down and turned her full attention to her son. He stood in his worn Superman pajamas, looking smaller than his 10 years. What's on your mind, sweetie? Chase said something weird today. Ethan wouldn't meet her eyes. After you talked to his dad, Rachel's heart skipped a beat. What did he say? He said. Ethan fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. He said you used to be in love with his dad. The wooden spoon Rachel had been holding clattered against the stovetop. She forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to her own ears. That's silly. Where would Chase get an idea like that? I don't know. Ethan shrugged. He just seemed really sure about it. Rachel crossed the kitchen and knelt in front of her son, placing her hands on his shoulders. Honey, sometimes kids say things without really understanding what they're talking about. Chase was probably just upset about what happened today. Ethan nodded, but she could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. Okay, Mom, the pasta's almost ready. Why don't you go wash up for dinner? Rachel gave him a reassuring smile, waiting until he left the kitchen before letting it fade. She moved through the rest of the evening on autopilot, serving dinner, helping Ethan with his remaining homework, tucking him into bed. But her mind kept circling back to Chase's words, stirring up memories she'd worked hard to bury. Later that night, Rachel lay in her bed, staring at the shadows dancing across her ceiling. The house creaked and settled around her, but sleep remained elusive. Despite her best efforts, her thoughts drifted back 20 years to a summer that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. She'd been 19, working at her father's hardware store. Greg had come in looking for paint supplies. He'd been so different then, less polished but more genuine. His family had money, but he hadn't flaunted it the way he did now. They'd gotten to talking, and somehow one conversation had turned into daily visits, which had turned into evening walks by the river. Rachel rolled over, punching her pillow in frustration. She could still remember the way Greg used to look at her, like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. He'd tell her about his dreams of law school, of making a difference in the world. She'd share her hopes of opening her own business someday, and he'd listen like it was the most important thing he'd ever heard. For 3 months, they'd lived in their own private world. But summer had ended, as summers do. Greg left for Harvard, promising to write, to visit, to make it work somehow. The letters had grown shorter, then less frequent, then stopped altogether. Rachel had heard through mutual friends that he'd started dating a girl from Boston, someone from a good family, the kind of match his parents had always wanted for him. She'd moved on, of course, met Tom, fallen in love, built a life she was proud of. Even after losing Tom 5 years ago, she'd never looked back at that summer with regret. It had been what it was, young love, beautiful but temporary, like a sunset. But now, lying in the darkness, Rachel couldn't shake the unsettled feeling in her stomach. The Greg she'd known that summer and the man she'd confronted today seemed like two completely different people. When had he become so cold, so dismissive of others? The digital clock on her nightstand blinked 2:17 a.m. Rachel sighed, knowing she needed to sleep. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, and she couldn't afford to face them exhausted. She closed her eyes, trying to push away thoughts of summer evenings, young love, and the man Greg used to be. But even as she finally drifted off, one thought lingered. How had Chase known about that long-ago summer? What else had Greg told his son about their past? Rachel balanced 3 plates of steaming breakfast along her arm as she weaved between tables at Murphy's Diner. The morning rush was in full swing, and the clinking of cutlery mixed with the hum of conversation filled the air. She had just set down a plate of pancakes when Jenny, the hostess, caught her eye and pointed to the phone behind the counter. Rachel, it's the school again. Her stomach dropped. The cheerful smile she'd worn all morning vanished as she made her way to the phone, dodging a busboy with a bin of dirty dishes. Her hands felt clammy as she picked up the receiver. This is Rachel Carter. Principal Harris's carefully measured voice came through. Mrs. Carter, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. What's happened? Is Ethan okay? The words tumbled out before she could stop them. There was a pause, and Rachel could picture the principal adjusting his tie, a nervous habit she'd noticed during their last meeting. Ethan is fine, but there's been a development we need to discuss. Mr. Whitmore has expressed concerns about Ethan's continued enrollment at our school. Rachel gripped the counter edge. What exactly does that mean? He's formally requested Ethan's removal, citing behavioral incompatibility. The principal cleared his throat. Given Mr. Whitmore's standing in our community. Behavioral incompatibility? Rachel's voice rose, drawing looks from nearby customers. She turned to face the wall, lowering her voice. My son has done nothing wrong. He's the victim here, not the problem. I understand your position, Mrs. Carter, but no, you clearly don't. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. This is retaliation for me standing up to him, plain and simple. Perhaps if you and Mr. Whitmore could discuss this privately. I'll handle this myself, Rachel cut in. Thank you for letting me know. She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking. Everything okay, hon? Martha, the senior waitress, touched her shoulder gently. Rachel forced a smile. Just fine. Table 6 still waiting on their check? The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She mixed up orders twice, something she hadn't done in years, and nearly dropped a full coffee pot. Her mind kept returning to the parking lot confrontation with Greg. The way he'd smirked at her, dismissed her concerns like she was nothing more than an annoying insect, and now this. When the lunch rush finally ended, she sat in her car in the diner's parking lot, allowing herself 5 minutes to cry. Just 5 minutes to let out the fury and fear before she had to pick up Ethan. She wouldn't let him see her worry. He carried enough weight on his young shoulders already. The afternoon crawled by. Rachel helped Ethan with his math homework, made dinner, and tried to act normal. But her son was perceptive. He'd always been able to read her moods. "Mom?" he asked as they sat on their worn couch after dinner. "Are you mad at me?" Rachel pulled him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. "Of course not, sweetheart. Why would you think that?" "You've been quiet, and you hardly ate any dinner." He picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. "Is it because of what happened with Chase's dad?" "Oh, honey." Rachel shifted to face him, taking his small hands in hers. "Listen to me. You have done absolutely nothing wrong. Sometimes grown-ups, well, sometimes they don't handle things the way they should. But I promise you, we're going to figure this out." "Chase was actually nice to me today," Ethan said quietly. "He shared his cookies at lunch." Rachel's heart squeezed. Despite everything, her son still looked for the good in others. That was kind of him. "Yeah." Ethan leaned against her shoulder. "Mom, are they really going to make me leave school?" Rachel stroked his hair, remembering how hard she'd worked to get him into this school. The extra shifts, the careful budgeting, the proud moment when he'd first worn his uniform. "Not if I can help it," she said firmly. "Now, how about we watch that new nature show you've been talking about?" Later, after Ethan was asleep, Rachel sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea. The school's tuition paperwork lay spread before her, along with her checkbook and bills. She'd sacrificed so much to give Ethan a good education, to keep him in a school where he could thrive. Greg Whitmore wasn't going to take that away because his ego was bruised. Tomorrow, she decided, tomorrow she would go speak to Greg directly. No more working through the principal, no more letting others control the situation. She'd face him one-on-one and make him understand exactly what was at stake. She thought of Ethan's face when he'd told her about Chase sharing cookies. Maybe there was hope for the boys to move past this, if only their parents could set the right example. Rachel rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. The memory of young Greg, the one she'd known that summer so long ago, flickered through her mind. He'd been different then, before wealth and status had hardened him. There had to be a way to reach that person again, for both their sons' sakes. Rachel pulled into the parking lot of the Daily Grind, a small coffee shop on the quieter side of town. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to whiten her knuckles. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dashboard, and she took a deep breath to steady herself. Through the window, she could see Greg Whitmore already seated at a corner table, his attention focused on his phone. He wore a crisp navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Rachel smoothed her diner uniform and wished she'd had time to change. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. The coffee shop was nearly empty, with just a couple of college students typing away on laptops. Soft jazz played in the background, a stark contrast to the tension she felt building in her chest. Greg looked up as she approached. His usual smirk was absent, replaced by something more reserved. He stood, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Rachel," he said, his voice quieter than she remembered from their parking lot encounter. "Thank you for meeting me." She slid into the seat, noticing 2 cups already on the table. "Is one of those for me?" "Hazelnut latte, if I remember correctly." He pushed 1 cup toward her. The fact that he remembered her coffee preference from 20 years ago caught her off guard. "You didn't have to." "Please," he said. "It's the least I can do after." He trailed off, adjusting his tie. A young barista approached with a plate of scones, setting them between them. Rachel waited until she left before speaking. "About Ethan's removal from the school," she began, her voice firm despite her nervousness. "It's completely unfair. He's done nothing wrong." Greg leaned back, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I may have acted hastily. The situation with Chase is more complex than I initially understood." "Complex?" Rachel's voice rose slightly. "Your son has been bullying mine for weeks. There's nothing complex about that. Chase is having a difficult time adjusting since his mother and I separated," Greg said, then took a sip of his coffee. "Not that it excuses his behavior." Rachel felt her anger softening slightly at this glimpse of vulnerability, but she wouldn't let him deflect. "Ethan's been through difficulties too. He lost his father when he was just 5. But he doesn't use that as an excuse to hurt others." Greg's eyes snapped to her face at the mention of Ethan's father. He set his cup down slowly, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. The silence stretched between them. "How old is Ethan?" he asked suddenly. 10, Rachel answered, her stomach tightening. "Why?" Greg's fingers drummed against the table. 10 years, he repeated softly. His gaze never left her face. "Rachel, he looks an awful lot like someone I knew a long time ago." The coffee shop seemed to shrink around them. Rachel's hand trembled as she set her cup down, coffee sloshing against the sides. "What exactly are you asking, Greg?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Is there any possibility that Ethan could be mine?" The question hung in the air between them like a physical thing. Rachel's chest felt tight, her heart hammering against her ribs. "No," she said firmly, meeting his gaze. "Ethan is not your son." Greg's expression remained skeptical. "Are you absolutely certain? The timing?" "I was already dating James when you left for Harvard." Rachel cut him off, her voice sharp. "Ethan is James's son. End of discussion." "Rachel," Greg's tone was gentle but persistent, "you have to understand why I'm asking. The resemblance is coincidence?" she finished. "Nothing more." Greg sat back, studying her with those calculating eyes she remembered so well from their youth. The doubt in his expression was clear, and it made her hands shake with a mixture of anger and fear. "I think we're done here," Rachel said, standing abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor, drawing glances from the college students. "Rachel, wait." Greg stood too, reaching for her arm but stopping short of touching her. "Whatever the truth is, we need to handle this situation carefully, for both boys' sake." She gathered her purse, suddenly feeling suffocated by the coffee shop's cozy atmosphere. "The only thing that needs handling is Chase's bullying. That's what this meeting was supposed to be about." "I'll speak with the principal," Greg said quickly. "Ethan can stay at the school, but this conversation isn't over." Rachel turned to face him one last time. "Yes, it is. Thank you for the coffee." She walked out of the daily grind on unsteady legs, the bell's cheerful chime mocking the heaviness in her chest. Through the window, she could see Greg still standing at the table, watching her go with that same thoughtful, doubtful expression. As she sat in her car, Rachel's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel. What had started as a simple meeting about bullying had turned into something far more complicated. She could see it in Greg's eyes. He wasn't going to let this go. The morning sun felt too bright now, harsh and revealing. Rachel started her car, her mind already racing with how to protect Ethan from the storm she could feel brewing on the horizon. Rachel lay in her darkened bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazy circles above her. The digital clock on her nightstand blinked 1:47 a.m., its red numbers the only light in the room. Sleep felt impossible after the coffee shop confrontation with Greg. Her mind drifted back to that summer, 19 years ago. The humidity had been thick enough to make her cotton sundresses stick to her skin as she worked at her father's hardware store. Greg would stop by almost daily, claiming he needed one thing or another for his summer job at the local construction company. She closed her eyes, remembering how he'd lean against the counter, that charming half-smile on his face. He wasn't the polished businessman he'd become. Back then, he wore work boots caked with mud and t-shirts with the sleeves rolled up to show tanned arms. "You're going to put your dad out of business if you keep giving me these employee discounts," he'd tease. "Maybe I just like seeing you come back," she'd reply, feeling bold and beautiful under his gaze. Rolling onto her side, Rachel pulled her knees up to her chest. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, some other girl who didn't know any better. They'd spent evenings walking along Main Street, sharing ice cream cones that melted too fast in the summer heat. Greg talked about his dreams of attending an Ivy League school, of becoming someone important. "Come with me," he'd said one night as they sat on the hood of his car overlooking the town lights. "You're smart enough. We could figure it out together." But her father's health had been failing. The store needed her, and Rachel couldn't imagine abandoning her family. She'd watched Greg drive away that August, promising to call, to visit. The calls grew shorter, less frequent, until they stopped altogether. Now, in her quiet bedroom, Rachel's thoughts turned to Ethan, sleeping peacefully down the hall, her sweet, sensitive boy who saw the best in everyone, even when they hurt him. The thought of him becoming caught in the middle of this mess made her stomach clench. She pushed back the covers and padded to his doorway. Moonlight spilled through his window, illuminating his face. In sleep, he looked so much like his father, her late husband Tom, who'd loved Ethan fiercely for the 8 short years they'd had together. Tom, who'd never questioned, never doubted, just loved them both with his whole heart. "I won't let anyone hurt you," she whispered to her sleeping son. Across town, in the Whitmore estate, Greg sat in his study, a glass of scotch untouched on his desk. The house felt too big, too quiet, despite its expensive furnishings and carefully curated art collection. "Chase?" he called out, hearing footsteps in the hallway. His son appeared in the doorway, already in his pajamas. "Yeah, Dad? Come here for a minute." Greg gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. "I wanted to ask you about Ethan Carter." Chase's shoulders tensed slightly as he sat down. "What about him?" "You two have had some problems at school," Greg said, watching his son's face carefully. "Tell me about him. What kind of kid is he?" Chase shifted uncomfortably in the oversized chair. I don't know. He's kind of quiet, really good at art and stuff." He paused, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. "He helps people with their math homework sometimes." "And why did you give him trouble?" The question hung in the air. Chase's face flushed slightly. "I guess. I don't know. Some of the other guys were doing it. He's different from us, doesn't have the right clothes or whatever." His voice grew smaller. "It was stupid." Greg studied his son, seeing hints of his own past mistakes. "Different isn't always bad, Chase. Sometimes it just means someone has different circumstances." Chase nodded, clearly eager to end the conversation. "Can I go to bed now?" "One more thing," Greg said. "What made you tell him about?" "About his mom and me? I heard Mom talking on the phone about it," Chase admitted. "She was mad about something, and mentioned you used to date Ethan's mom." He stood up quickly. "Good night, Dad." Greg watched him go, then turned to stare out the window at the manicured lawn bathed in security lights. The scotch remained untouched. Hours later, as the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, Rachel stood in her small kitchen. She carefully spread peanut butter on whole wheat bread, adding extra strawberry jam the way Ethan liked it. The coffee maker gurgled behind her, filling the kitchen with its familiar aroma. She packed the sandwich into Ethan's Star Wars lunchbox, along with an apple, some carrot sticks, and a small chocolate chip cookie. A yellow sticky note went on top. "Have a great day. Love, Mom," with a little heart drawn beside it. Rachel heard Ethan's alarm clock go off down the hall, followed by the soft pad of his feet heading to the bathroom. She squared her shoulders, pushing aside the weight of yesterday's confrontation and her sleepless night. What mattered now was getting Ethan through each day with his gentle spirit intact, protecting him from adult complications he shouldn't have to understand. She poured cereal into his favorite bowl just as he appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair sticking up at odd angles, still looking half asleep. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, keeping her voice light and normal. "Ready for another day?" The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows as Rachel refilled coffee cups, her movements automatic after years of practice. Her regular customers chatted about their daily lives, but her thoughts kept drifting to Ethan. The past few days had been different. No tearful phone calls from school, no quietly picking at his dinner, no made-up stomach aches to avoid going to class. "More coffee, Rachel?" Mr. Peterson asked, holding up his empty cup. She blinked, realizing she'd been standing at his table lost in thought. "Sorry about that," she said with a warm smile, filling his cup. Just have a lot on my mind. Your boy doing okay? He asked. Mr. Peterson had been coming to the diner for breakfast every day since before Ethan was born. He'd watched her son grow up through her stories shared over countless coffee refills. Actually, yes, Rachel said, surprised by how good it felt to say those words. He seems happier this week. During their morning drives to school, Ethan had started talking more, telling her about his classes instead of staring silently out the window. The dark clouds that had been hanging over him seemed to be lifting, little by little. On Wednesday, he'd practically bounced into the car after school. Mom, guess what? Chase gave me half his peanut butter and jelly sandwich today. Rachel had nearly slammed on the brakes. Chase Whitmore? Yeah. Ethan's eyes were bright with excitement. He said his mom always makes them too big anyway, and he didn't even want anything back. Rachel gripped the steering wheel tighter, uncertain how to feel. Was this some new kind of trick? But Ethan's smile was so genuine, so relieved, that she couldn't bring herself to voice her doubts. The next day, Ethan mentioned that Chase had picked him for his team in gym class, and not last either. He's actually pretty nice now, Mom, Ethan said, his voice careful, like he was afraid speaking it too loudly might break whatever spell had changed his former bully. Rachel wondered if Greg had ordered his son to be kind to Ethan. The thought made her uncomfortable. Forced kindness wasn't real kindness. But as the days passed, Chase's behavior seemed genuine. She overheard him laughing with Ethan during pickup one afternoon, something about a video game they both played. At home, she noticed other small changes. Ethan started doing his homework at the kitchen table again instead of hiding in his room. He asked for seconds at dinner. He even practiced his trumpet without being reminded, the bright notes floating through their small apartment like birds finally freed from their cage. On Friday afternoon, Ethan burst through the diner's door during her shift, waving a blue envelope. Mom! Mom! He dodged around the counter, ignoring her half-hearted reminder about customers only. What's got you so excited? Rachel asked, tucking her order pad into her apron pocket. Chase invited me to his birthday party. Ethan thrust the envelope into her hands, practically vibrating with excitement. It's next Saturday at his house. They're having a magician and everything. Rachel's stomach tightened as she opened the invitation. The card was thick and expensive feeling, with silver lettering announcing a magical afternoon at the Whitmore estate. She could picture the mansion, set back from the road behind its iron gates. She'd driven past it countless times, but had never been inside. Can I go? Ethan asked, his eyes huge and hopeful. Please? Rachel studied his face, the face that had been so sad just a week ago, that had tried so hard to be brave through months of bullying. Now it shone with anticipation, with the simple joy of being included. Chase said there's going to be a chocolate fountain, Ethan added hopefully, and his mom hired real magicians from Las Vegas. Rachel bit her lip. The thought of sending Ethan into Greg's home made her nervous. What if this was all some elaborate setup? But looking at her son's eager expression, she knew she couldn't let her own fears hold him back. Okay, she said finally. We'll go. Yes. Ethan pumped his fist in the air. Thank you, Mom. I'm going to go call Tommy and see if he got invited too. He dashed toward the back office where he usually did his homework during her shifts. No running, Rachel called after him, but she was smiling. Later that evening, after her shift ended, Rachel stood in their tiny kitchen. Ethan was already in bed, but she could hear him talking excitedly on the phone with his friend Tommy about the party. She pulled their calendar off the wall, a free one from the local bank, with generic nature photos for each month. The party date was 2 Saturdays away. Rachel uncapped a pen and slowly circled the number, her hand hesitating for just a moment. What would it be like, being in Greg's house? Would his wife be there? Would he try to talk to her about their conversation at the coffee shop? She shook her head, forcing those thoughts away. This wasn't about her or Greg or their complicated past. This was about Ethan, about letting him have a normal childhood experience, about letting him believe that people could change for the better. Rachel hung the calendar back up, the circled date seeming to stand out from all the others. Through the wall, she could hear Ethan's excited chatter winding down as Tommy's mom presumably told him it was bedtime. Mom? Ethan called out. Can you come tuck me in? Coming, honey. She walked to his room where he was already snuggled under his Star Wars comforter, his phone on the nightstand. Tommy's coming to the party too, he said sleepily as she sat on the edge of his bed. And guess what? Chase told him that the magicians are going to make a real tiger appear. Rachel smoothed his hair back from his forehead. That sounds amazing, sweetie. Now get some sleep, okay? Okay. He yawned. Mom, thanks for letting me go. Of course, baby. She kissed his forehead and stood up. Sweet dreams. Back in the kitchen, Rachel stared at the circled date again. Whatever happened at that party, she would handle it. For now, she would focus on the present, on Ethan's smile, on Chase's unexpected kindness, on the possibility that sometimes people really could change for the better. Rachel smoothed her simple navy dress as she pulled into the circular driveway of the Whitmore estate. The afternoon sun glinted off dozens of luxury cars parked along the winding path. Her old sedan stuck out like a dandelion in a rose garden. Mom, look at all the balloons. Ethan pressed his face against the window, eyes wide at the colorful arch marking the entrance to the backyard. I see them, honey. Rachel tried to match his excitement, but her stomach was doing flip-flops. Remember what we talked about best behavior, okay? I know, Mom. Ethan was already unbuckling his seatbelt, clutching Chase's carefully wrapped present. They followed the sound of music and children's laughter around the sprawling house. The Whitmore's backyard was like something out of a magazine. Perfectly manicured lawns stretched toward a gleaming pool where kids splashed under the watchful eyes of 2 lifeguards. A professional party planner directed activities at various stations. Face painting, a rock-climbing wall, and what looked like a mini carnival game area. Ethan, you made it. Chase jogged over, wearing swim trunks and a huge grin. The pool's awesome. Did you bring your suit? Rachel watched in amazement as her normally shy son lit up. Yeah, Mom packed it in my bag. Cool. The changing rooms are over there. Chase pointed to a pool house that was bigger than their apartment. Come on, I'll show you. Before Ethan took off, Rachel caught his arm. Present first, swimming second. Oh, yeah. Ethan thrust the package at Chase. Happy birthday. Chase's genuine thanks, as he accepted the modest gift, made Rachel's tension ease a fraction. She watched the boys dash off, Ethan's dark head beside Chase's blonde one, and found a quiet spot near some potted plants where she could keep an eye on the pool. Other parents mingled in small groups, trading school gossip and summer vacation plans. Rachel recognized a few faces from school pickup but didn't approach anyone. She was here for Ethan, nothing more. Not much for crowds. Greg's voice startled her. He stood holding 2 glasses of lemonade, offering one to her. Thank you. Rachel accepted the drink, noting how his casual polo shirt probably cost more than her entire outfit. It's quite a party. Vanessa's doing. She lives for this sort of thing. His tone was light but carried an edge. The boys seemed to be getting along well. Rachel watched Ethan and Chase racing across the pool, their laughter carrying across the yard. They do, I have to admit. I was surprised by the invitation. Chase's idea, actually. Greg's eyes followed the boys. He came to me last week, said he wanted to invite Ethan. He paused, something softening in his expression. Your son's a good kid, Rachel. The way he handles himself, he's got real character. The compliment caught her off guard. Thank you. That means a lot. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the party unfold. Greg seemed different here, away from the school parking lot and coffee shop confrontations. More human somehow. He reminds me of someone I used to know, Greg said quietly. Someone who always saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Rachel felt her cheeks warm, knowing he was talking about her younger self. Before she could respond, a perfectly manicured hand appeared on Greg's arm. Darling, the caterers need your signature on something. Vanessa Whitmore was everything. Rachel wasn't tall, elegantly dressed in a designer sundress, not a hair out of place despite the summer heat. Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she looked Rachel over. You must be Ethan's mother. How nice of you to come. Thank you for having us. Rachel met her gaze steadily. It's a lovely party, isn't it? We do try to make Chase's birthdays special. Vanessa's grip on Greg's arm tightened slightly. Although, sometimes I think we go overboard. Not everyone is comfortable with this sort of scale. The subtle dig hung in the air. Greg cleared his throat. I should check on that paperwork. Rachel, please help yourself to the buffet. Rachel watched them walk away. Vanessa's quiet murmur carrying just enough for her to catch. Really, Gregory? What were you thinking? The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of pool splashes and birthday cake. Rachel stayed on the periphery, making occasional small talk with other parents, but mostly watching Ethan have the time of his life. He got his face painted like a tiger, mastered the ring toss game, and hadn't stopped smiling once. As the sun began to set, parents started gathering their tired children. Rachel found Ethan wrapped in a fluffy towel, comparing video game strategies with Chase. "Time to head home, sweetheart." "Aw, Mom. 5 more minutes? Sorry, Tiger, but we've got church tomorrow." She held up his bag. "Did you get all your things from the changing room?" "Yeah." Ethan turned to Chase. "Thanks for inviting me. This was awesome. Thanks for coming." Chase's reply was genuine. Maybe you could come over again sometime. We got this new gaming system." Rachel saw Greg watching the exchange from across the yard, his expression unreadable. Vanessa stood beside him, whispering something that made his shoulders tense. "We'll see," Rachel said gently. "Tell your parents thank you for having us." The drive home was filled with Ethan's excited chatter. "Did you see me on the rock wall, Mom? And Chase showed me this cool diving trick, and the cake was huge, and..." Rachel glanced in the rearview mirror at her son's animated face, still bearing traces of tiger stripes. Her heart felt full and heavy at the same time. The day had been perfect for him, exactly what she'd hoped. But Vanessa's cold appraisal and Greg's confusing warmth left her unsettled. "Mom, are you listening?" "Of course, honey. Tell me more about the diving trick." As Ethan launched into another story, Rachel pushed her worries aside. For now, she'd focus on her son's happiness. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. The autumn breeze carried the sharp whistle across Riverside Academy's soccer field as Rachel hurried from her car, still wearing her diner uniform. She'd barely made it for the second half of Ethan's game, having begged Katie to cover the start of her shift. The metal bleachers were packed with parents, their jackets bright spots of color against the gray afternoon sky. Rachel climbed to an empty spot near the top, scanning the field for Ethan's number 14 jersey. He was playing defense today, bouncing on his toes as he watched the action unfold at the other end. A familiar voice rang out from the bottom row. "Great hustle, Chase! Keep pushing!" Greg Whitmore stood with his hands cupped around his mouth. "You too, Ethan. Nice positioning." Rachel blinked in surprise. This was the third school event this week where Greg had shown up. Monday, it was the science fair, where he'd spent 10 minutes asking Ethan about his project on wind energy. Yesterday, he'd appeared at the fall choir concert, though Chase wasn't even in the music program. The ball suddenly came Ethan's way. He intercepted it cleanly, passing to a teammate as the small crowd cheered. Greg's voice carried above the rest. "Beautiful defense, Ethan." Rachel noticed 2 mothers a few rows down exchange glances, their heads bent together in whispered conversation. She'd seen that look before, the same one she got in the grocery store when people recognized her as the diner waitress who'd confronted Greg Whitmore in the school parking lot. But now, the whispers felt different, more curious than judgmental. Rachel watched Greg as he paced the sideline, equally invested in both boys playing. He looked relaxed in jeans and a casual sweater, so different from his usual business suits. When Chase and Ethan executed a perfect give-and-go play, Greg's genuine smile lit up his whole face. "Your son's getting quite good," a voice said beside her. Linda Parker, another single mom Rachel knew from PTA meetings, had settled onto the bleacher. "He and Chase make quite a team now." "Funny how things change, isn't it?" Rachel nodded, unsure how to respond. The transformation in the boys' relationship still felt surreal. Just weeks ago, she'd been sitting in the principal's office discussing Chase's bullying. "Mr. Whitmore seems very supportive," Linda continued, her tone carefully neutral, but her eyes shrewd. "Of both boys." More whispers rippled through nearby parents. Rachel felt her cheeks warm, but kept her eyes fixed on the field. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. The game ended in a tie, both teams celebrating with high fives and orange slices. Rachel made her way down to the field where Ethan was gathering his gear, his face flushed with exercise and excitement. "Did you see my pass to Chase, Mom?" He was practically bouncing. "And when I stopped that forward from scoring, you were amazing, honey." Rachel helped him collect his water bottle and shin guards. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks," Ethan beamed. "Mr. Whitmore said my defensive skills are really improving. He told me all about when he played soccer in college." Rachel's heart squeezed at the admiration in Ethan's voice. Before she could respond, Greg approached with Chase. Great game, boys. He clapped them both on the shoulder. Those drills we practiced really paid off. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Drills? Dad's been helping us during lunch break sometimes, Chase explained, teaching us proper passing technique and stuff. I hope that's okay, Greg added quickly, meeting Rachel's eyes. The PE teacher supervised, of course. Rachel forced a smile. Of course. Thank you for taking the time. The drive home was filled with Ethan's animated replay of every game moment. Rachel listened, trying to focus on his happiness rather than her growing unease. When they arrived at their small apartment, Ethan settled at the kitchen table with his homework while Rachel started dinner. She watched him bend over his math problems, pencil tapping thoughtfully against his chin, a gesture so like his late father's it made her throat tight. The kitchen's fluorescent light cast shadows under his dark lashes, highlighting how much he'd grown recently. Ethan, she kept her voice casual as she stirred the pasta sauce. Can we talk for a minute about Mr. Whitmore? Sure. Ethan looked up, his expression open. He's really nice now, isn't he? Nothing like before. Rachel chose her words carefully. Yes, he seems different. I want to make sure you're comfortable with him being around so much. It's okay if you're not. Ethan was quiet for a moment, fidgeting with his pencil. I like it, he finally said. He notices things, you know? Like today, when I made that defensive play, he saw it. And at the science fair, he asked real questions about my project, not just the polite grown-up kind. The simple honesty in his voice made Rachel's chest ache. She remembered all the father-son events Ethan had missed, all the times she'd seen him watching other kids with their dads at school functions. He told Chase and me stories about when he was our age, Ethan continued, his eyes bright. Did you know he used to deliver newspapers? And that he worked really hard to get into college? He said anyone can succeed if they're willing to put in the effort. Rachel turned back to the stove, blinking hard. The pasta water had boiled over, making the burner hiss. She wiped it up with a dish towel, buying time to steady her voice. That's true, she managed. Hard work is important. Mom? Ethan's tone was hesitant now. Is it weird that Mr. Whitmore comes to stuff? Some kids were talking about it at school. Rachel abandoned the sauce and sat down across from him. Hey, she waited until he met her eyes. The only thing that matters is how you feel about it, not what other people say or think. Okay? Ethan nodded, then bent back over his homework. Rachel watched him work, her emotions tangled and contradictory. Joy at seeing him flourish under Greg's attention. Gratitude for the positive male influence, but also worry about the growing attachment. Fear of what might happen if Greg's interest faded. The sound of Ethan's pencil scratching across paper filled the small kitchen. Rachel stood to finish dinner, her mind still wrestling with the situation. She'd spent so long being both mother and father to Ethan, protecting him from disappointment. Now she had to decide whether to keep those walls up or let someone else in, someone who had hurt them both before. Rachel's small apartment filled with the sounds of two boys debating over their history project. Scattered across the coffee table were colored markers, poster board, and printouts about the American Revolution. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully drawing a map of the 13 colonies, while Chase lounged on the worn but comfortable couch, reading facts from his tablet. Did you know George Washington lost more battles than he won? Chase looked up from his screen. But he still ended up winning the whole war. Really? Ethan's eyes widened with interest. Maybe we should put that on the poster. It's kind of inspiring, right? Rachel watched from the kitchen doorway, still trying to process how naturally the boys worked together. Just weeks ago, Chase had been Ethan's tormentor. Now here he was, sprawled on their sofa like he belonged there, sharing interesting facts and actually listening to Ethan's ideas. The apartment might have been modest with its mismatched furniture and walls that needed a fresh coat of paint, but Rachel had made it cozy. Family photos lined the walls, and potted plants brightened the windowsills. She'd spent the morning stress cleaning before Chase arrived, though she tried to tell herself it didn't matter what Greg Whitmore's son thought of their home. You boys want some snacks? Rachel called out, already pulling chocolate chip cookies from the oven. The smell of fresh-baked goods filled the small space. Yes, please, both boys answered in unison, then looked at each other and grinned. Rachel was arranging cookies on a plate when someone knocked on the door. Her stomach did a little flip. Greg was early to pick up Chase. She smoothed her hair, checked her reflection in the microwave door, then caught herself and frowned. What did it matter how she looked? She opened the door to find Greg standing there in casual clothes, jeans, and a navy sweater that made him look more approachable than his usual business suits. He held up a paper cup carrier with 4 coffees. "I brought reinforcements," he said with a slight smile. "I remember you always liked hazelnut." Rachel's breath caught. He'd remembered that detail from all those years ago. "Thanks," she managed, stepping back to let him in. "The boys are just finishing up their project." Greg's eyes took in the apartment, but his expression remained neutral. "Something smells amazing." "Mom made cookies," Ethan announced proudly. "They're the best." "Is that so?" Greg set the coffee carrier on the kitchen counter. "Mind if I try one?" Rachel gestured toward the plate. "Help yourself. Chase, your dad brought you a hot chocolate." The boys gravitated to the kitchen, and soon they were all standing around the small counter space, munching cookies and sipping their drinks. Rachel couldn't help noticing how Greg's eyes kept moving between Ethan and Chase, studying them with an unreadable expression. "How's the project coming along?" Greg asked, addressing both boys equally. "Pretty good," Chase replied. "Ethan's really good at drawing the maps, and he had this cool idea about showing Washington's losses versus his wins." "It was Chase's fact," Ethan added quickly. "I just thought we could use it." Rachel watched the interaction with amazement. Chase was giving Ethan credit? The change in him was remarkable. "Well," Greg said, "sounds like you make a good team." He caught Rachel's eye over his coffee cup, and something passed between them, a shared acknowledgement of how far things had come. The boys returned to their poster, while Rachel and Greg drifted toward the kitchen table. She sat down, and after a moment's hesitation, he joined her. "Thank you," Greg said quietly, "for letting Chase come over. I know things haven't been ideal between our families." Rachel wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "The boys seem to be working it out better than we adults did. Kids can be surprisingly adaptable." Greg paused, watching the boys argue good-naturedly about font choices. "Sometimes they show us the way, don't they?" Their conversation stayed careful but civil, touching on safe topics like school events and the upcoming fall festival. Rachel found herself relaxing slightly, remembering how easy it had once been to talk to him, before life had pulled them in different directions. When the project was finally complete, the boys proudly displayed their poster. Rachel had to admit it looked impressive, with its detailed maps, timeline, and fun facts arranged creatively across the board. "Excellent work, both of you," Greg said, standing up. "Chase, we should head out. Your mother's expecting us for dinner." As Chase gathered his things, Greg lingered by the door. "Rachel." He hesitated, then continued. "I've been thinking a lot lately about life, about choices made, and paths not taken." His voice grew quieter. "There are some areas where I'd like to make up for lost time." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Rachel's heart thundered in her chest as she watched them leave. Chase chattering about the project, Greg's hand on his son's shoulder. She closed the door slowly, then leaned against it, feeling the solid wood at her back as she tried to steady her breathing. "Mom?" Ethan's voice pulled her back to the present. "Can we put the poster somewhere safe until Monday?" Rachel pushed herself away from the door, grateful for the distraction. "Of course, honey. Let's clear a space on top of the bookshelf." But as they carefully moved the poster, Greg's words echoed in her mind. Make up for lost time. She busied herself with cleaning up the art supplies, telling herself not to read too much into it. But her hands trembled slightly as she gathered markers and threw away scraps of paper, her pulse still racing from those few loaded words. The evening settled over Rachel's apartment like a soft blanket, bringing with it the kind of quiet that made memories surface. Ethan had just disappeared into his room to finish his math homework, leaving Rachel alone with her thoughts and a cup of chamomile tea. She padded across the worn carpet to her bedroom closet, reaching up to the highest shelf where a weathered cardboard box sat untouched for years. The box wasn't fancy, just an old shoe container with summer memories written in faded marker on its side. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she pulled it down. Settling onto her bed, she lifted the lid. The familiar scent of old paper and forgotten moments wafted up. Birthday cards from her late husband, ticket stubs from movies, and beneath them all, a stack of photographs held together with a rubber band that had grown brittle with age. Rachel's breath caught as she carefully slipped the top photo free. There they were, she and Greg, frozen in time, at the Cedar Grove Summer Fair. The string lights above them created a magical glow, catching the youth in their faces. Rachel remembered that night with startling clarity. The sticky sweetness of cotton candy, the distant chorus of carnival rides, and the way Greg's laugh seemed to bubble up from somewhere genuine and unguarded. In the photo, her 19-year-old self leaned into Greg's shoulder. Both of them caught mid-laugh at some forgotten joke. Her hair was longer then, flowing free instead of pulled back in the practical style she wore now. Greg looked so different too, wearing a simple t-shirt instead of his usual business suits, his face open and unburdened by the weight of expectations. The sound of Ethan's footsteps in the hallway snapped Rachel back to the present. She quickly slid the photo under her pillow, not ready to explain this piece of her past to her son, not when she barely understood what it meant herself. "Mom?" Ethan's voice carried from the hallway. "Can you help me with this problem?" "Coming, sweetie," Rachel called back, quickly returning the box to its hiding place. She pushed the closet door shut just as Ethan appeared in her doorway, math worksheet in hand. Across town, in the Whitmore's elegant study, Greg sat in his leather armchair while Chase sprawled on the Persian rug, surrounded by his own homework. The room smelled of old books and expensive cigars, a scent Greg's father had cultivated and Greg had carefully maintained. "Dad?" Chase looked up from his social studies textbook. "What were you like when you were my age?" Greg's fingers tightened imperceptibly around his reading glasses. "Oh, pretty ordinary, I suppose. Played a lot of baseball, studied hard. My father, your grandfather, was big on academic excellence." "Did you always live in Cedar Grove?" "Most of my life," Greg answered carefully. "Went away for college, of course. Harvard was a family tradition." Chase rolled onto his back, staring at the coffered ceiling. "What about before college? Did you have a girlfriend or anything?" Greg's pause was slight, but noticeable. "Nothing serious. Just focused on getting into a good school, making the family proud." He kept his tone light, casual. "Why the sudden interest in ancient history? I don't know. Just thinking about stuff." Chase sat up, crossing his legs. "Ethan's mom seems nice, different from most of the other moms at school." In the hallway, Vanessa stood perfectly still, one manicured hand resting against the wall. She'd been passing by with a glass of wine when the conversation caught her attention. There was something in Greg's voice, a careful neutrality that sparked her suspicion. "Rachel Carter has certainly been present lately," Greg said, his words measured. "She works hard to give Ethan opportunities. That's admirable." Vanessa's fingers tightened around her wine glass. Rachel Carter, the woman from the parking lot confrontation. The one who'd been watching Greg at Chase's birthday party. With those knowing eyes. And now Greg was praising her? "She makes really good cookies," Chase offered. "When we were working on our project today, she brought us chocolate chip ones, still warm and everything." "That was thoughtful of her," Greg replied, and Vanessa detected a softness in his voice that made her jaw clench. "Yeah, and she's funny too. She told us stories about when she was growing up here. Said the summer fair used to be the biggest thing in town." Vanessa heard Greg clear his throat. "Well, it was a smaller place back then. Everyone knew everyone." "Did you know her when you were young?" The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things. Vanessa leaned closer to the doorway. "We went to the same high school," Greg finally said. "Different circles, really. I was focused on getting into Harvard, following the path your grandfather laid out." More careful words, more measured responses. Vanessa took a silent step back from the door, her mind working quickly. There was a story here, one that could explain Greg's sudden interest in that woman's son, the careful way he spoke about the past, the strange tension she'd sensed at the party. She moved silently down the hallway, her heels silent on the thick carpet. In her private sitting room, she opened her laptop and began typing, "Cedar Grove High School," followed by a year she estimated would have been Greg's graduating class. She had always been good at research, at finding the threads that needed pulling. The wine in her glass reflected the screen's glow as yearbook photos began to load. Somewhere in these digital archives was a truth Greg wasn't sharing, a story from that summer he claimed meant nothing. And Vanessa intended to find it. Because if there was one thing Vanessa Whitmore understood, it was that the past never stayed buried forever. Especially not when it walked right into your present, wearing a waitress uniform and carrying your husband's memories in her eyes. The PTA meeting buzzed with the usual energy of parents packed into the school cafeteria. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over metal folding chairs arranged in neat rows. Rachel sat near the back, her waitress uniform hidden under a cardigan she kept in her car for moments like these. She checked her watch. She'd have to leave for her evening shift soon. The meeting droned on about fundraisers and upcoming events, but Rachel's mind kept drifting to the photo she'd found last night, the one of her and Greg at the summer fair. She'd tucked it away in her dresser drawer, unable to throw it out, but not wanting Ethan to stumble across it either. Is this seat taken? Rachel looked up to find Vanessa Whitmore standing beside her, perfectly styled in a cream cashmere sweater and pearl earrings. Her smile was practiced, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. No, please. Rachel shifted her purse to make room, her stomach tightening. Vanessa settled gracefully into the chair, smoothing her tailored slacks. I've been meaning to chat with you, Rachel. May I call you Rachel? Of course. Rachel kept her voice neutral, though her pulse quickened. I couldn't help but notice Greg's taken quite an interest in your son's activities lately. Vanessa's tone was light, almost musical. It's so unlike him to attend school events. He usually leaves all that to me. Rachel focused on keeping her hand still in her lap. I suppose Chase and Ethan's friendship has brought out the involved parent in him. Vanessa nodded, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. Greg mentioned you two knew each other? Years ago, was it? The casual question carried weight, like a silk glove concealing brass knuckles. Rachel could feel other parents stealing glances their way. Briefly, Rachel said. We grew up in the same town. How fascinating. Vanessa leaned closer, her perfume expensive and overwhelming. Greg's been so distracted lately, talking about the past, about missed opportunities. Her smile sharpened. I'd hate for anyone to get the wrong idea about his sudden interest in certain students. Rachel met Vanessa's gaze steadily. I'm just grateful the boys are getting along now. That's all that matters to me. Of course it is. Vanessa patted Rachel's hand, her manicured nails gleaming. We all want what's best for our children, don't we? Speaking of which, I should check on the spring fundraiser planning. So nice catching up. She rose smoothly, leaving behind a chill that had nothing to do with the cafeteria's air conditioning. Rachel sat through the rest of the meeting in a daze, Vanessa's words echoing in her head. Later that evening, after her shift at the diner, Rachel found Ethan still awake in bed reading a comic book. His bedside lamp cast a warm glow across his face. The face that had sparked all this trouble with its hints of the past. Hey, sweetie. Everything okay? She perched on the edge of his bed, noting the slight furrow in his brow. Ethan dog-eared his page. Yeah, Chase was kind of weird at school today. Weird how? He said his parents were fighting this morning, about old stuff. Ethan picked at a loose thread on his blanket. He said his mom kept asking his dad questions about someone from before. Rachel's heart squeezed. That must have been hard for Chase to hear. He said they never used to fight like this. Ethan looked up at her. Mom, did you really know Mr. Whitmore when you were young? Rachel smoothed his hair back, buying time. We were friends once, a long time ago. But that was before I met your dad. Before you were born. Chase thinks his mom is jealous. Ethan's voice was small. Because his dad keeps coming to school stuff now. Rachel swallowed hard. Grown-up relationships can be complicated, honey. But none of that is your fault, or Chase's. You two just focus on being friends and having fun, okay? Ethan nodded, but his eyes were troubled. Rachel tucked him in extra tight, wishing she could shield him from all of this. As she turned out his light, she wondered if her confrontation with Greg that day in the parking lot had set off a chain reaction she couldn't control. In her own room, Rachel sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her dresser drawer where that old photo lay hidden. She thought of Vanessa's pointed questions, of Greg's increasing presence at school, of Chase's comments about his parents fighting. The past wasn't staying quietly buried anymore, and she feared what its resurrection might cost. Not just her, but Ethan too. She changed into her pajamas, her diner uniform tossed in the hamper along with the cardigan she'd worn to the PTA meeting. Tomorrow would bring another day of balancing work and motherhood, of navigating this increasingly complicated situation. But for now, she just needed sleep, even if it meant dreaming of summer fairs and string lights and choices made long ago. The autumn evening wrapped around the local sports complex like a cozy blanket, bringing with it the crisp scent of fallen leaves and the satisfying thud of soccer balls being kicked across the practice field. Rachel hugged her arms against the slight chill, watching from the sidelines as Ethan gathered his gear. The floodlights cast long shadows across the grass, and the sound of cleats scraping against concrete echoed as the kids made their way to the parking lot. Great practice, Ethan. Greg's voice carried across the field as he approached, still wearing his business suit but with the tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. He'd started showing up to practices lately, always standing a respectful distance from Rachel. Ethan's face lit up, his cheeks still flushed from running. Thanks, Mr. Whitmore. Did you see that goal I made? Sure did, buddy. That was some fancy footwork. Greg turned to Rachel, his expression careful but friendly. Listen, I was thinking, there's this great little grill just down the street. Maybe you and Ethan would like to grab some dinner? My treat. Rachel hesitated, but Ethan's hopeful look made the decision for her. Please, Mom. I'm starving. Well, Rachel checked her watch. For once, she didn't have an evening shift. I suppose that would be nice. The grill turned out to be a comfortable, family-style restaurant with wooden booths and sports memorabilia covering the walls. The hostess led them to a corner table, and Ethan slid into the booth next to Rachel, his soccer bag tucked safely underneath. Order whatever you'd like, Greg said, passing them menus. Under the warm lighting, his face looked softer than it did in the school parking lot weeks ago. Ethan's eyes widened at the options. Can I get a burger and fries? Rachel smiled. Yes, but remember your vegetables. The side salad here is actually pretty good, Greg offered. Chase likes it with the honey mustard dressing. Their server, a cheerful college-aged girl, took their orders, burgers for the boys, grilled chicken for Rachel. As they waited, Greg leaned forward, his attention focused on Ethan. So, tell me about school. Besides soccer, what's your favorite part? Ethan thought for a moment, absently playing with his straw wrapper. I really like science class. We're learning about space right now. Space, huh? Greg's eyes lit up with genuine interest. What about it interests you the most? Everything. Ethan's usual shyness melted away as he launched into an explanation about black holes and supernovas. Rachel watched in quiet amazement as her son, who often kept to himself at home, spoke animatedly about his passions. Greg listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that showed he was truly engaged. Have you ever thought about what you want to do when you grow up? Maybe be an astronomer, Ethan said, then added quickly. Or maybe design rockets. I'm not sure yet. Those are some big dreams, Greg replied, his tone encouraging rather than dismissive. You know, the science program at the school is actually getting some new equipment next semester. There's going to be a pretty impressive telescope in the lab. Rachel noticed how Ethan sat up straighter, his confidence growing with each moment of adult attention. Their food arrived, and the conversation flowed naturally between bites of burger and crisp golden fries. Mom makes sure I keep my grades up, Ethan said, dunking a fry in ketchup. She says education is really important. Your mom's absolutely right about that. Greg agreed, catching Rachel's eye with what seemed like newfound respect. And from what I hear, you're doing great in all your classes. Rachel felt a warm glow of pride, both at the praise for her son and the acknowledgement of her parenting. The tension that usually hung between her and Greg had softened into something almost comfortable. As they finished their meals, Ethan excused himself to the restroom, leaving Rachel and Greg in a moment of awkward silence. He's a remarkable kid, Greg said finally, his voice quiet. You've done an amazing job with him, Rachel. Thank you, she replied, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. He makes it easy, most of the time. He's got a good heart. That he does. Greg paused, then added, Listen, about everything that happened before. Rachel shook her head. Maybe not tonight. This has been nice. Let's just leave it at that for now. Greg nodded, understanding. When Ethan returned, they gathered their things and headed to the parking lot. The night had grown cooler, and stars were beginning to peek through the darkening sky. I could give you both a ride home, Greg offered, gesturing to his luxury SUV parked nearby. Rachel smiled but shook her head. Thanks, but we're good. It's a nice night for a walk, and we're not far. Thanks for dinner, Mr. Whitmore, Ethan said, shouldering his soccer bag. Anytime, buddy. Keep up the great work on the field and in science class. As Rachel and Ethan walked home, their shoes crunching through scattered leaves, she listened to her son chatter about the evening. His voice was animated, his step lighter than it had been in months. The street lamps cast warm pools of light on the sidewalk, and a gentle breeze carried the promise of more autumn days ahead. Mom? Ethan asked suddenly. Do you think Mr. Whitmore will come to more of my practices? Rachel squeezed his shoulder gently. "We'll see, honey. But wasn't it nice to have dinner out?" "Yeah," Ethan agreed, then launched into another story about his latest science project. Rachel let his words wash over her, feeling something shift inside her chest, a small, cautious flutter of possibility. Not quite trust, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. She thought about the way Greg had listened to Ethan, really listened, and how her son had bloomed under that attention. Their apartment building came into view, its familiar brick facade welcoming them home. As they climbed the stairs to their third-floor unit, Rachel realized she felt lighter too, as if some of the weight she'd been carrying had begun to lift, just a little. The grand ballroom of the Lakeside Country Club sparkled with elegant decorations and soft lighting. Crystal chandeliers cast warm shadows across marble floors, while round tables draped in cream-colored linens dotted the space. Rachel smoothed her navy blue dress, a rare splurge from the department store's sale rack, and watched Ethan fidget with his clip-on tie. "You look very handsome," she assured him, fixing his collar for the third time. Ethan gave her a nervous smile, his dress shoes clicking against the polished floor as they made their way inside. Greg spotted them immediately. He excused himself from a small group of well-dressed parents and strode over, looking perfectly at ease in his tailored tuxedo. "Rachel! Ethan! I'm so glad you could make it." His genuine warmth caught Rachel off guard. She'd spent the past week second-guessing her decision to accept his invitation to the school's annual fundraising gala. "Thanks for inviting us," Rachel managed, taking in the opulent surroundings. The event was clearly designed to impress the school's wealthiest donors. Crystal wine glasses clinked, while classical music played softly in the background. She felt out of place, but Ethan's eyes were wide with wonder. "Come on," Greg said, placing a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. "There are some people I'd love you to meet." He glanced at Rachel, seeking permission. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Greg led them through the crowd, stopping first at a group that included the head of the school board. "James, Sarah, I'd like you to meet Ethan Carter. He's the one who gave that impressive presentation on renewable energy in the 5th grade science fair last month." Ethan's cheeks flushed pink, but he remembered his manners and shook hands like Rachel had taught him. "Nice to meet you," he said clearly. "Ah, yes." James smiled broadly. "My daughter Caroline wouldn't stop talking about your wind turbine model. Very innovative thinking, young man." Rachel watched in amazement as Greg continued to introduce Ethan around the room. He knew exactly which of Ethan's achievements would interest each person: his soccer skills for the athletic director, his reading scores for the curriculum coordinator, his volunteer work at the animal shelter for the community outreach chair. "Ethan's also quite the artist," Greg mentioned to the art department head, Mrs. Matthews. "His perspective drawings are remarkable for his age." "Really?" Mrs. Matthews's eyes lit up. "You must show me your work sometime, Ethan. We're always looking for new talent for the spring art show." As they moved between groups, Rachel noticed how Greg's hand would occasionally rest protectively on Ethan's shoulder, how he beamed with genuine pride when someone complimented the boy. It wasn't for show. Greg had clearly been paying attention to every detail of Ethan's school life. Dinner was served at elegantly set tables, and Rachel found herself seated with Greg, Ethan, and several board members. The conversation flowed easily, with Greg smoothly, including Ethan in discussions about the school's future plans. "What do you think about adding a robotics program?" one of the board members asked Ethan directly. "That would be amazing." Ethan's eyes sparkled. "My friend Chase and I were just talking about how cool it would be to build robots for competitions." Rachel's throat tightened at the casual mention of Chase. A month ago, the idea of her son being friends with his former bully would have seemed impossible. Now, thanks to Greg's quiet intervention, the boys had formed a tentative friendship. After dinner, while Ethan was occupied with some other students his age, Greg approached Rachel where she stood by the dessert table. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said softly. "I know this isn't exactly your usual scene." Rachel watched Ethan laughing with his classmates across the room. "I wasn't sure about it," she admitted, "but seeing how you've introduced him to everyone, how you've highlighted his achievements." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You didn't have to do that." Greg's expression grew serious. "Yes, I did. These people need to know what an exceptional young man Ethan is. His talents and hard work deserve recognition, regardless of." He trailed off, then continued more quietly. "Rachel, I know I've made mistakes. Many of them. But watching Ethan grow, seeing the person he's becoming, largely thanks to your incredible parenting, I just want to help create opportunities for him." The sincerity in his voice made Rachel's eyes sting. "You really mean that, don't you? Every word." Greg's gaze drifted to where Ethan was now examining the silent auction items with his friends. "Thank you for trusting me enough to be here tonight, for letting me be even a small part of his life." Rachel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The evening had felt almost magical, so different from their tense confrontation in the parking lot months ago. Looking at Greg now, she saw not the dismissive wealthy donor, but a man genuinely invested in her son's future. The sound of tinkling glass drew their attention as the headmaster prepared to make his closing remarks. Greg touched Rachel's arm lightly. "Would you and Ethan like to join my table for dessert? They're serving that chocolate cake," Ethan mentioned, loving at the soccer team dinner. Rachel smiled, remembering how Ethan had raved about that cake. "Yes," she said softly. "We'd like that." As they walked toward their table, Rachel watched Greg wave Ethan over, his face lighting up as the boy bounded across the room. Whatever complicated history lay between them, she couldn't deny the gift Greg was offering her son, not just connections or opportunities, but genuine care and attention. For tonight at least, that felt like enough. The morning sun cast long shadows across the school's parking lot as Rachel guided her old Honda into the drop-off line. Her thoughts still lingered on last night's fundraiser, how Greg had introduced Ethan to everyone with such warmth, how her son's eyes had lit up at finally feeling included. Ethan sat in the back seat, humming quietly as he reviewed his math homework one last time. His new confidence showed in the way he held his shoulders straight, no longer trying to make himself invisible. "Don't forget your science project folder," Rachel reminded him, catching his eye in the rearview mirror. "And remember, I'll pick you up early today for your dentist appointment." "Got it, Mom." Ethan gathered his backpack, ready to hop out when they reached the front of the line. Rachel noticed Vanessa Whitmore's sleek silver Mercedes pull up beside them, out of sequence with the orderly line of cars. Her stomach tightened. Something about Vanessa's expression through the tinted window made Rachel's skin prickle with unease. As Rachel's car reached the drop-off point, Vanessa was already stepping out of her vehicle, her designer heels clicking against the pavement. Her perfectly styled blonde hair caught the morning light as she strode purposefully toward them. "Rachel, dear," Vanessa called out, her voice carrying across the busy drop-off area. "We simply must have a little chat." Several parents turned their heads, sensing the theatrical edge in Vanessa's tone. Rachel's fingers tightened on the steering wheel as she pulled to a stop. "Ethan, why don't you head in?" "Actually," Vanessa interrupted, positioning herself between their car and the school entrance. "This concerns him too." Her smile was razor sharp, her eyes cold despite the pleasant expression she maintained. Rachel stepped out of the car, her heart beginning to race. "This isn't the time or place, Vanessa." "Oh, I think it's exactly the right time and place." Vanessa's voice rose slightly, ensuring the growing crowd of parents and students could hear. "You see, I've been doing some fascinating research into the summer of 2013. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. Behind her, she heard Ethan's car door open as he stepped out, curious about the delay. "It's quite remarkable," Vanessa continued, her words dripping with false sweetness, "how certain dates line up. That lovely summer romance with my husband, and then, well," she gestured toward Ethan with a manicured hand. "Such interesting timing, wouldn't you say?" Several parents had stopped completely now, their children forgotten, as they watched the scene unfold. Rachel could hear whispers starting, see phones being pulled out discreetly. "That's enough," Rachel said firmly, though her voice shook slightly. "Ethan, go inside." "Why so rushed?" Vanessa's voice turned sharp. "Afraid of what else might come to light? About Greg's secret son, perhaps?" The whispers exploded into audible gasps. Rachel heard a distinct, "I knew it," from somewhere in the crowd. Her knees felt weak, but she forced herself to stand straight. "Mom." Ethan's voice behind her was small, confused. When Rachel turned, she saw his face had crumpled, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. "Get in the car, honey," Rachel managed, her throat tight. She could feel dozens of eyes on them, could practically see the text messages and social media posts being composed. Vanessa wasn't finished. "It's really quite admirable, isn't it?" she announced to her captive audience. Raising him all alone, never asking for anything, well, except for that expensive private school tuition. Very clever, Rachel. Rachel's hands were shaking as she opened her car door. Ethan had already scrambled back inside, his head down, shoulders hunched. Through the window, she could see him frantically wiping at his eyes. Nothing to say? Vanessa pressed, taking a step closer. No denial? How interesting. Rachel forced herself to take a deep breath, fighting back tears of rage and humiliation. Without a word, she got into the driver's seat and started the engine. The crowd parted reluctantly as she pulled away from the curb, Vanessa's triumphant smile visible in her rearview mirror. The silence in the car was deafening. Rachel wanted desperately to say something, anything, to comfort her son, but no words seemed adequate. She could hear Ethan's shaky breathing from the back seat, could feel the weight of his pain and confusion like a physical presence. They drove past familiar streets, leaving behind the school and its gossip-hungry audience. Storefronts and traffic lights blurred in Rachel's vision as she blinked back tears. Every few seconds, she glanced in the rearview mirror, watching Ethan stare blankly out the window, his homework folder forgotten in his lap. 10 minutes passed in that heavy silence. Rachel's phone buzzed repeatedly in her purse, probably concerned messages from other parents, or worse, reporters of the local news stations looking for a juicy story. She ignored them all, focusing on the road ahead and the precious cargo in her back seat, whose world had just been shattered by a woman's cruel ambition. The morning sun continued to rise, oblivious to the pain it illuminated in the small Honda making its way through the quiet streets, carrying a mother and son bound together by love and now united in their hurt. The sunset painted Rachel's small apartment in shades of orange and purple, but the usual warmth of evening felt hollow tonight. She stood outside Ethan's closed door, a plate of his favorite mac and cheese growing cold in her hands. The hallway clock ticked softly, marking each moment of silence. "Ethan, honey," she knocked gently. "I made your favorite." No response. Rachel pressed her forehead against the cool wood of the door. The events from this morning played on repeat. In her mind, Vanessa's cruel words, the shocked faces of other parents, and worst of all, Ethan's expression as understanding dawned on his young face. She tried again. "Can I come in? We should talk about what happened." A muffled, "Go away," came from inside. Rachel set the plate down and turned the doorknob. The room was dark except for the fading daylight filtering through half-closed blinds. Ethan lay curled up on his bed, facing the wall, still in his school clothes. "I'm not hungry," he said before she could speak. Rachel sat on the edge of his bed, careful to give him space. His baseball trophies and science fair ribbons lined the shelves above, reminders of happier times. "You need to eat something, sweetheart. I'm not going back." Ethan's voice cracked. "Ever." The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. She reached out to touch his shoulder, but he tensed, so she pulled back. "What happened today? What Mrs. Whitmore said? Is it true?" Ethan rolled over suddenly, his eyes rimmed. "Is Mr. Whitmore really my dad?" "No, honey." Rachel's voice wavered despite her effort to stay strong. "Your father was James Carter. He loved you more than anything in this world." "Then why did Chase's mom say those things? Why does everyone look at me different now?" His words tumbled out faster, years of confusion finally spilling over. "And why does Mr. Whitmore keep coming to my games and being nice to me all of a sudden?" Rachel's throat tightened. How could she explain adult complications to a 10-year-old? How could she protect him from the cruelty of people who wielded gossip like weapons? Sometimes grown-ups, they make mistakes. They say hurtful things without thinking about who they're hurting. She tried to smile, but tears threatened to fall. "But that doesn't change who you are, Ethan. You're my brave, kind, amazing boy." "I'm not brave." He curled up tighter. "I don't want to see anyone. Chase probably hates me now. Everyone's going to laugh." "Oh, sweetheart." This time, when Rachel reached for him, he didn't pull away. She gathered him into her arms, feeling his thin shoulders shake with silent sobs. "Why can't things just go back to normal?" he whispered against her shoulder. Rachel stroked his hair, her own tears finally falling. "I know, baby. I know." Across town, in the Whitmore's expansive living room, Greg paced while Vanessa sat perfectly composed on their designer couch. "What were you thinking?" Greg's voice was low but intense. He's just a child, Vanessa. How could you humiliate him like that? Vanessa sipped her wine, unmoved. I was thinking about our family's reputation. About Chase. While you've been playing mentor to your little friend's son, did you consider how this looks to everyone? How it affects our son? This isn't about reputation. Greg stopped pacing to face her. This is about basic human decency. You deliberately hurt a 10-year-old boy to what? Prove a point? Oh, please. Vanessa set down her glass with a sharp clink. Don't act so righteous. You're the one who's been reckless, showing up at his games, inviting them to events. People talk, Gregory. I simply brought those whispers into the light. There was nothing to bring into the light. Rachel and I knew each other years ago, yes. But Ethan is not my son. And even if he was, Greg ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Even if he was, what you did was cruel. If he's not yours, then why the sudden interest? Vanessa's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the arm of the couch. Why risk everything we've built? Our standing in this community, Chase's social position. It all matters whether you want to admit it or not. Greg stared at her, really seeing her for perhaps the first time in their marriage. Is that all you care about? Position? Standing? Someone has to. Her voice turned cold. While you're having your middle-aged crisis of conscience, I'm protecting what matters. Back in her apartment, Rachel lay in bed, sleep refusing to come. The ceiling fan spun lazy circles above her, its soft whirring unable to quiet her thoughts. She could hear Ethan's even breathing through the thin walls. He'd finally fallen asleep, exhausted from crying. Just days ago, everything had seemed possible. Greg's genuine interest in Ethan, the way he'd proudly introduced him at the fundraiser, how naturally they'd all interacted, it had felt like the beginning of something good. Not a fairy tale ending, but maybe a chance for Ethan to have a positive male figure in his life. Now those fragile hopes lay shattered. Tomorrow, Ethan would have to face his classmates, their whispers, their stares. Chase would probably retreat, torn between loyalty to his mother and his budding friendship with Ethan and Greg. Rachel pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting fresh tears. Greg would likely step back, choose the path of least resistance to protect his reputation and keep peace at home. The ceiling fan continued its endless circles as Rachel stared upward, feeling more alone than she had in years. Her son was hurting, and for the first time since James died, she wasn't sure how to fix it. Rachel's phone buzzed on her nightstand at 5 a.m., her usual wake-up time for the morning shift. She reached over and silenced it, then lay still in the pre-dawn darkness. The thought of facing everyone at the diner, with their questioning looks and whispered conversations, made her stomach turn. Down the hall, Ethan's room remained quiet. He'd barely spoken since yesterday's incident, picking at his dinner before retreating back to bed. Rachel couldn't bear the idea of sending him to school to face more whispers and stares. She picked up her phone again and dialed the diner's number. Hey, Linda, it's Rachel. I'm not feeling well today. Might be coming down with something. Her voice caught slightly. I know it's short notice. Take care of yourself, honey, Linda said, her tone sympathetic. We'll manage. After calling the school office to report Ethan's absence, Rachel padded down the hallway in her slippers. She knocked softly on his door. Ethan, you awake? A muffled yeah came from inside. She opened the door to find him curled up in bed, still in his pajamas, staring at the model airplane hanging from his ceiling. How about we play hooky today? Just you and me? Ethan rolled over to face her, his eyes uncertain. Really? Really? Rachel sat on the edge of his bed. I was thinking we could bake some cookies. Maybe those chocolate chip ones with the extra vanilla that you love? A tiny spark of interest flickered across his face. Can we add Ms. too? We can add whatever you want. She reached out to smooth his tousled hair. Why don't you come help me check what ingredients we need? In the kitchen, Rachel pulled out her old recipe box, a wedding gift from her mother-in-law, filled with handwritten cards yellowed at the edges. Ethan stood beside her at the counter, still quiet but present, as they took inventory of their baking supplies. Looks like we need more chocolate chips, Rachel said, peering into the nearly empty bag. And definitely Ms. And milk, Ethan added softly. We're almost out. Good catch. She smiled at him. Want to put on real clothes and walk to the corner store with me? The morning air was crisp and clean. They walked slowly. Rachel matching Ethan's pace as he scuffed his sneakers against the sidewalk. At the store, she let him pick out 2 different kinds of Ms. while she gathered the other ingredients. The familiar routine of shopping together felt like a small step back toward normal. Back home, Rachel turned on the radio to the oldies station, the one that always played the songs her mother used to sing along to in their kitchen. She measured flour, while Ethan cracked eggs into a bowl, his tongue poking out in concentration. "You're getting really good at that," she said as he separated the whites cleanly. "No shells this time." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Remember when I dropped a whole egg on the floor? And it splattered all over my shoes?" Rachel chuckled. "How could I forget?" They worked together, measuring and mixing, the kitchen filling with the sweet smell of vanilla. Rachel showed Ethan how to cream the butter and sugar until it was just right, letting him control the electric mixer while she steadied the bowl. For a while, they could pretend yesterday hadn't happened. The doorbell rang just as they were dropping spoonfuls of dough onto the baking sheets. Rachel wiped her hands on a dish towel and went to answer it, finding Joanne on the other side with a paper bag from the diner. "Linda mentioned you called in sick," Joanne said, stepping inside. "I brought you both some lunch, those turkey clubs you like." "You didn't have to do that." Rachel's voice wavered slightly. "Of course I did." Joanne squeezed her arm. "That's what friends are for." In the kitchen, Ethan was carefully spacing out cookies on the tray. "Hi, Ms. Miller," he said quietly. "Hey, kiddo." Joanne set the bag on the counter. "Those cookies smell amazing." While the first batch baked, they sat around the small kitchen table with their sandwiches. Joanne kept the conversation light, telling funny stories about her morning at work. Rachel noticed Ethan actually eating instead of just pushing his food around. After Ethan went to check on the cookies, Joanne leaned in closer to Rachel. "How are you really doing?" Rachel stared down at her half-eaten sandwich. "I don't know. Part of me wants to pull him out of that school, move somewhere new where nobody knows us." Rachel Carter. Joanne's voice was firm but gentle. "You can't let them chase you away. This is your community too." But Ethan needs to see his mother stand up, not back down. Joanne reached across the table to grab Rachel's hand. "You're one of the strongest people I know. You faced worse than some stuck-up society woman with a grudge." The timer dinged, and Ethan called out, "Mom, they're ready." Rachel stood to help him with the hot baking sheet, considering Joanne's words. As she watched Ethan carefully transfer golden brown cookies to the cooling rack, his movements precise and determined despite everything, something shifted inside her. "You know what?" Joanne said, coming up beside them. "These cookies are too good to keep to ourselves. Maybe you should bring some to the PTA meeting next week." Rachel paused, spatula in hand. The thought of walking into that room made her nervous, but there was also a spark of defiance growing. "Maybe I should." They spent the rest of the afternoon baking, filling the apartment with warmth and the sweet scent of chocolate. Joanne stayed, helping them package up cookies in neat little bags, tied with ribbon she found in Rachel's craft drawer. Every now and then, she'd catch Rachel's eye and give her an encouraging nod. By the time the last batch came out of the oven, Rachel's kitchen counter was covered in cooling cookies, and Ethan had chocolate smeared on his cheek. He looked more relaxed than he had since yesterday morning, methodically arranging cookies in perfect rows. "Mom?" he asked suddenly, concentrating on his task. "Are we going back to school tomorrow?" Rachel exchanged a look with Joanne before answering. "Yes, honey, we are." He nodded slowly, then reached for another cookie. "Okay, can I take some of these for Chase?" Rachel felt her throat tighten with emotion at his simple gesture of kindness. "Of course you can." Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear. Rachel sat in her usual spot at Grace Community Church, third pew from the back, where she and Ethan had attended since he was tiny. Today, though, Ethan had refused to come, claiming a stomachache. She knew better. He was hiding from the whispers that seemed to follow them everywhere now. The familiar wooden pew creaked as she shifted, smoothing her simple blue dress. Around her, the usual families filled their regular spots, though she noticed a few sideways glances. News traveled fast in their small town. Rachel kept her eyes forward, focusing on the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. Pastor Mike stepped up to the pulpit, his weathered face kind as he surveyed the congregation. "Today," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary, "we're going to talk about standing firm when life tests us." Rachel's hands tightened on her worn Bible. She hadn't told anyone at church about the situation with Greg and Vanessa, but somehow Pastor Mike's words felt personally directed at her. In 2 Thessalonians, Pastor Mike continued, Paul writes about perseverance in the face of trials. He reminds us that our strength comes not from hiding or running away, but from standing firm in what we know is right. Rachel thought of Ethan at home, trying to hide from the world. She thought of her own impulse to withdraw, to maybe even move to a different school district where nobody knew their story. When we face opposition, Pastor Mike's voice grew passionate, we have two choices. We can let it defeat us, or we can use it as fuel to create positive change. Sometimes God allows challenges in our lives not to break us, but to inspire us to help others facing similar struggles. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who always sat next to Rachel, reached over and squeezed her hand. Rachel squeezed back, grateful for the simple gesture of support. As the sermon continued, Rachel felt something shift inside her. The hurt and embarrassment began transforming into determination. Ethan wasn't the first kid to face bullying at school, and he wouldn't be the last. Maybe there was a bigger purpose to all of this. After the final hymn, Rachel lingered in her pew, letting the other congregants file out. She pulled out her small notebook from her purse, the one she usually used for grocery lists and work schedules, and began writing furiously. "Everything all right, dear?" Mrs. Henderson asked, pausing in the aisle. Rachel looked up, and for the first time in days, she felt a genuine smile spread across her face. "Yes," she said. "I think it finally is." Back home, she found Ethan curled up on the couch with a comic book. "How was church?" he asked quietly, not looking up. "It was exactly what I needed," Rachel replied, settling beside him. She gently took the comic book from his hands. "Honey, we need to talk about something." Ethan tensed, but Rachel continued. "What happened to you? The bullying, the gossip. It's not right. And it's not just happening to you. There are probably other kids at school going through similar things." "Probably," Ethan mumbled, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. "Well," Rachel said, pulling out her notebook, "I've been thinking. Instead of letting this situation defeat us, what if we used it to help make things better? Not just for you, but for everyone?" Ethan finally looked up, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Rachel showed him her notes. "I want to start an anti-bullying initiative at the school. Something that brings everyone together. Students, teachers, parents. We could have assemblies, workshops, maybe even a buddy system for kids who feel alone." "But," Ethan hesitated, "what about Mrs. Whitmore? And all the gossip?" Rachel took a deep breath. "That's exactly why we need to do this. Because when people are hurting, they sometimes hurt others. And the only way to break that cycle is to stand up and say, 'Enough.'" She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through contacts. "I'm going to call Principal Harris right now. Then I'm going to call every parent I know who might support this." Ethan watched as she dialed the principal's number, his expression a mix of worry and wonder. To her surprise, Principal Harris answered despite it being Sunday. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his tone cautious. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow," Rachel said firmly. "I have a proposal for a school-wide anti-bullying initiative that I think you'll want to hear." There was a pause on the other end. "Mrs. Carter, given the recent situations, perhaps we should wait until things settle down." "With all due respect, Mr. Harris," Rachel replied, her voice steady, "I think we've all waited long enough. This isn't about me or my son anymore. This is about every child who's ever felt unsafe or unwelcome at school. Don't we owe them better?" Another long pause. Then, "Monday morning, 8:30 a.m. I can give you 30 minutes. "Thank you," Rachel said. "I'll be there." After hanging up, she immediately started making more calls. She reached out to Joanne, who had connections with the PTA. She called Sarah Matthews, whose daughter had switched schools last year after being bullied. She even called her old friend Linda, who taught at a school across town that had implemented a successful peer mentoring program. By late afternoon, her notebook was filled with ideas and supporter names. Ethan had moved from the couch to the kitchen table, quietly drawing while she made her calls. She noticed he was sketching what looked like a poster with the words, "Be kind," in bold letters. "That's beautiful, honey," she said, pausing between calls. Ethan looked up shyly. "Maybe we could use it? For the initiative?" Rachel felt tears prick at her eyes. But these weren't tears of sadness or frustration. For the first time in days, They were tears of hope. "I think that's a wonderful idea," she said, sitting down beside him. "Want to help me prepare for tomorrow's meeting?" Ethan nodded, reaching for a fresh piece of paper. As they worked together at the kitchen table, Rachel felt a familiar verse from the morning's sermon echo in her mind. "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stand firm. Let nothing move you." And that's exactly what she intended to do. Rachel smoothed her skirt one more time before entering Principal Harris's office. She had traded her usual diner uniform for her best business casual outfit, navy slacks and a cream blouse she saved for parent-teacher conferences. Her manila folder, filled with carefully prepared notes, felt heavy in her hands. "Mrs. Carter," Principal Harris greeted her with his usual political smile. "Please, have a seat." Rachel settled into one of the stiff chairs facing his desk, noting how he straightened his tie, a nervous habit she'd observed during their previous meetings. The morning sun streamed through his office window, highlighting the carefully arranged certificates on his wall. "Thank you for meeting with me," Rachel began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened recently, and I believe we have an opportunity here." Principal Harris's smile tightened slightly. "An opportunity?" Rachel opened her folder, pulling out a typed outline. "Yes, I'd like to propose a school-wide assembly on bullying and respect, not just for the students, but involving parents too." She passed the outline across his desk. "I've done some research on similar programs at other schools." The principal scanned the document, his forehead creasing. "Mrs. Carter, while I appreciate your initiative, these kinds of events can be politically sensitive. We need to consider all parties involved." "That's exactly why we need this," Rachel leaned forward slightly. "Not to point fingers or assign blame, but to bring our community together, to show our children how to handle conflict with dignity." Principal Harris set the paper down, adjusting his glasses. The logistics alone would be challenging, getting parents to attend during work hours, finding speakers. "I've already spoken with Dr. Martinez from the university's child psychology department. She's willing to be our keynote speaker, pro bono." Rachel pulled out another sheet. "And I've contacted several parents who've expressed interest in sharing their family's experiences, anonymously, of course." The principal's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of Dr. Martinez, whose name carried weight in educational circles. He drummed his fingers on his desk, clearly weighing the political implications. "Mrs. Johnson from the PTA has offered to help coordinate," Rachel continued, pressing her advantage. "And the church has agreed to let us use their audiovisual equipment for the presentation." Principal Harris leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've put considerable thought into this." "Because it matters," Rachel met his gaze steadily. "Not just for Ethan or Chase, but for every child who's ever felt powerless or alone. We have a chance to show them that their community cares, that we're willing to tackle difficult conversations together." A long moment passed as Principal Harris considered. Finally, he sighed. 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks to put this together. And I'll need to approve all materials and speakers beforehand." Relief flooded through Rachel. "Thank you, sir. You won't regret this." The next week became a blur of activity. Rachel spent her breaks at the diner making calls, scheduling meetings around her shifts. She met with Mrs. Johnson at the local coffee shop, planning logistics over cooling cups of coffee. "We'll need chairs set up theater style," Mrs. Johnson noted, making lists in her precise handwriting. "The gym can hold about 300 if we do it right." Rachel nodded, checking her own notes. Dr. Martinez suggested breaking into smaller discussion groups after her talk. We could use the classrooms down the main hall. They worked late into the evening, hammering out details. Rachel returned home, exhausted but determined, finding Ethan already asleep on the couch, homework spread across the coffee table. The parent response surprised her. Mrs. Thompson, whose daughter had switched schools last year due to bullying, agreed to share their story. Mr. Rodriguez, whose son had once been a bully but had turned things around, volunteered to speak about transformation and second chances. "We need this," Mrs. Thompson told Rachel over the phone, her voice thick with emotion. "For too long, we've all just suffered in silence." Rachel created information packets, staying up late at night to proofread handouts about conflict resolution and emotional intelligence. She coordinated with Dr. Martinez, who sent over her presentation outline focusing on the long-term effects of bullying and the importance of community intervention. The most challenging part was approaching other parents during school pickup, distributing flyers and gathering support. Some avoided eye contact, hurrying past. Others stopped to listen, sharing their own stories in hushed voices. "My Tommy went through something similar last year," one mother confided, clutching Rachel's flyer. "Nobody did anything because the other boy's father was on the school board." Each story strengthened Rachel's resolve. She organized a planning committee that met in the library after school, their small group growing with each session. They discussed practical strategies, ways to make the assembly interactive and engaging. "We could have the students role-play scenarios," suggested Miss Peters, the drama teacher who had volunteered to help. "Sometimes showing is more powerful than telling." Principal Harris stopped by one of their meetings, watching from the doorway as they worked. Rachel caught his eye, noting the thoughtful expression on his face as he observed their progress. By the end of the week, Rachel had compiled a detailed proposal for the assembly structure, complete with timeline, speaker bios, and discussion guidelines. She delivered it to Principal Harris's office Friday afternoon, her hands steady as she handed over the folder. "This is comprehensive," he admitted, flipping through the pages. "You've managed to get quite a bit of community support." "People care about this issue," Rachel replied simply. "They just needed someone to take the first step." Principal Harris nodded slowly, closing the folder. "I'll review everything over the weekend." "But," he paused, adjusting his glasses, "I think this might actually work, Mrs. Carter." As Rachel left his office, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. There was still much to do, materials to print, volunteers to coordinate, logistics to finalize. But for the first time since this all began, she felt like real change might be possible. She found Ethan waiting by her car after school, kicking at loose gravel in the parking lot. "How did it go?" he asked quietly. Rachel pulled him into a quick hug. "It went well, honey. Really well." She didn't tell him about all the parents who had shared similar stories, or how his situation had sparked a larger conversation about change. For now, it was enough that he knew she was fighting for him, for all of them. Rachel sat at her small kitchen table, surrounded by handwritten notes and pamphlets about bullying prevention. The evening light filtered through the worn curtains, casting long shadows across her work. Ethan was at soccer practice with a trusted neighbor, giving her precious quiet time to organize her thoughts for the upcoming assembly. A knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone, and most of her friends called first. Through the peephole, she saw Greg Whitmore shifting uncomfortably in the hallway, looking distinctly out of place in his expensive suit. Rachel's hand hesitated on the doorknob. After everything that had happened, she wasn't sure she wanted to face him. But something in his demeanor, less confident than usual, made her open the door. "Greg?" She kept her voice neutral, though her heart raced. "What are you doing here?" He cleared his throat. "I heard about what you're planning. The assembly." His eyes darted past her to the papers spread across the table. "May I come in?" Rachel stepped aside, watching as Greg entered her modest apartment. She saw him taking in the cramped space, the mismatched furniture, the wall of Ethan's school awards, their whole life on display. "Would you like some coffee?" she offered, more out of habit than hospitality. "No, thank you." He remained standing, hands in his pockets. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened, about how I handled things." He paused, looking at a photo of Ethan on the wall. "Or rather, how I didn't handle them." Rachel crossed her arms. "What exactly do you mean?" "I should have stepped in when Vanessa..." He trailed off, grimacing. "I should have done a lot of things differently. When she made those accusations in front of everyone, I stayed quiet. I was worried about appearances, about what people would think." His voice grew quieter. "I forgot about what really mattered." "And what's that?" Rachel challenged, though she kept her voice level. "The kids, Ethan and Chase, what we're teaching them about right and wrong." Greg ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that reminded Rachel of their younger days. "I've been trying to protect my reputation so hard that I forgot about protecting what's actually important." Rachel moved to the kitchen table, gathering her papers into neater piles. "Ethan hasn't been sleeping well," she said finally. "He thinks everyone at school is talking about him. Wondering if he's your..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Greg's face tightened with guilt. "I know. Chase told me Ethan's been eating lunch alone again." He took a step closer to the table. "That's partly why I'm here. I want to help with the assembly." Rachel looked up sharply. "I don't need your pity, Greg, or your guilt. It's not pity, he insisted. I've seen how you've handled everything, with grace and strength. You're doing what I should have done months ago, taking a real stand against bullying, against gossip, against all of it. What I need, Rachel said, meeting his eyes directly, is for people like you to stop hiding behind their reputations and actually speak up. These kids, all of them, not just Ethan and Chase, they need to see adults doing the right thing, even when it's hard. Greg was quiet for a moment, looking at the pamphlets on the table. You're right. He pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down, a gesture that seemed to surprise them both. I've been reading about what happens to kids who are bullied, the long-term effects. Chase used to be such a kind child, and somewhere along the way, he shook his head. I let him think it was okay to treat people the way he treated Ethan. I'm his father. I should have done better. Rachel felt something in her chest soften slightly. It's not too late to show him a different way. That's why I want to speak at the assembly, Greg said firmly. Not just attend, speak. I want to talk about what I've learned, about how we as parents need to do better. He met her gaze. If you'll let me. Rachel studied him, looking for any trace of the smirking man from the parking lot confrontation. Instead, she saw something that looked remarkably like sincerity. This isn't just about making yourself look good? She asked. No, Greg replied immediately. This is about making things right, about showing both our sons that we can admit our mistakes and try to fix them. Rachel sat down across from him, pushing aside her papers. The assembly is in 3 days. What would you say? The truth, Greg said simply, that I was wrong, that I let my position in the community blind me to the harm being done, that every child deserves to feel safe and respected at school, regardless of their background. He leaned forward slightly. And that it's time for all of us, especially those of us with influence, to take responsibility for the environment we're creating for our children. Rachel felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. You understand this might affect your standing with certain people? Vanessa won't like it. Let her not like it, Greg said with unexpected firmness. I'm done letting fear of gossip determine my actions. He smiled slightly. I learned that from watching you. A key turned in the lock, and they both looked up as Ethan entered, still in his soccer uniform. He stopped short at the sight of Greg in their kitchen. Mr. Whitmore, he asked uncertainly. Greg stood up. Hello, Ethan. I was just talking to your mom about the assembly she's organizing. It's a very important project. Ethan looked between them, clearly trying to read the situation. Are you coming to it? Yes, Greg said, meeting Rachel's eyes briefly. In fact, I'm going to help. A small smile tugged at Ethan's lips. Really? Really, Greg confirmed. He moved toward the door. I should go, but I'll be in touch about the details. This last part was directed at Rachel. She nodded. I'll email you the schedule tomorrow. At the door, Greg turned back. Thank you, Rachel, for showing me what courage really looks like. After he left, Ethan came to stand beside her. Mom, is everything okay? Rachel pulled him into a hug, breathing in the grass and sunshine smell of him. Yes, sweetheart. I think maybe things are finally going to get better. Rachel's hands trembled as she smoothed her freshly pressed blouse in front of the mirror. The morning sun streamed through her bedroom window, casting a warm glow that didn't quite match her nervous energy. She had rehearsed her speech countless times, but the butterflies in her stomach refused to settle. Mom? Ethan appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his school uniform. Are you okay? Rachel managed to smile. Just a little nervous, sweetie. How do I look? Like a superhero, Ethan said with complete sincerity, making Rachel's heart swell. The drive to school was quieter than usual. Rachel noticed Ethan fidgeting with his backpack strap, a sure sign he was anxious too. Remember, she said softly, you don't have to stay for the assembly if you don't want to. I want to, he replied, his voice small but determined. I want to hear you speak. The school parking lot was fuller than Rachel had ever seen it. Parents streamed toward the auditorium, their voices creating a low buzz of anticipation. The principal had sent out a notice about the mandatory assembly, and it seemed everyone had shown up. Inside the building, Rachel slipped away to the small room behind the stage while Ethan joined his classmates. Her friend Joanne was waiting there, clipboard in hand. The auditorium's packed, Joanne reported, giving Rachel a quick hug. And I saw Greg arrive with Chase. They're sitting near the front. Rachel nodded, trying to keep her breathing steady. Through the curtain, she could hear the shuffle of feet and murmur of voices as people found their seats. The microphone squealed briefly as someone tested it, making her jump. The principal's voice came through clearly as he welcomed everyone and introduced the purpose of the assembly. Rachel closed her eyes, mentally reviewing her opening lines. When she heard her name announced, her legs felt like lead. But then she thought of Ethan's face that morning, like a superhero, and straightened her shoulders. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about every child who'd ever felt small, every parent who'd felt helpless, every person who needed to know they weren't alone. The lights felt warm on her face as she walked to the podium. Hundreds of faces looked back at her. Students, teachers, parents. She spotted Ethan in the middle section, sitting tall. In the front row, Greg sat with Chase, their expressions unreadable. Rachel took a deep breath and began. "Good morning," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'm here today to talk about something that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not. I want to talk about kindness, about respect, and about the courage it takes to stand up for what's right." The microphone picked up the slight tremor in her voice, but she pressed on. "We teach our children to be kind, to share their toys, to say please and thank you. But somewhere along the way, some of us forget these basic lessons. We forget that our actions, no matter how small, can leave lasting marks on others." She saw several parents shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I want to tell you about a boy, a bright, sensitive 10-year-old who loves science and soccer. A boy who came home one day with his new backpack covered in mud, trying to hide his tears. A boy who started making excuses to stay home from school because he was afraid of facing another day of whispered insults and lonely lunches." The auditorium was completely silent now. Rachel could see some students exchanging glances, others looking down at their hands. This boy, like every child in this room, deserves to feel safe. He deserves to walk these halls without fear. He deserves to learn and grow and make mistakes without being made to feel worthless. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "But this isn't just about the children who were bullied. It's about the ones doing the bullying too. Children learn what they live, they watch us, the adults in their lives, and mirror our behavior. When we dismiss cruelty as kids being kids, when we turn a blind eye to misconduct because it's easier, when we value status over character, we fail them all." Rachel saw Greg lean forward slightly, his expression intense. Chase sat beside him, face flushed. "The solution isn't complicated, though it isn't always easy. It starts with each of us, with having the courage to speak up when we see wrong being done, with showing our children that true strength lies not in pushing others down, but in lifting them up." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. "I stand before you today not just as a concerned parent, but as someone who believes in the power of change. I've seen firsthand how a simple act of kindness can transform a child's day. I've witnessed how one person standing up can inspire others to do the same." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "We have an opportunity here, all of us, to create a community where every child feels valued, where every parent feels heard, where every person knows they belong. It doesn't matter what car we drive or what neighborhood we live in. What matters is the example we set, the values we uphold, and the future we create for our children." Rachel could see several parents wiping their eyes. Some students were nodding, and even a few teachers looked moved. "I ask you today to join me in making this change, to commit to speaking up when you see someone being mistreated, to remember that every child in this room is somebody's whole world, to choose kindness again and again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." She gripped the podium slightly, her voice full of quiet conviction. "Because, in the end, what our children will remember isn't the fancy clothes or the expensive toys. They'll remember how we made them feel. They'll remember who stood up for them, who showed them what courage looks like, who taught them that their worth isn't determined by their social status or their parents' bank account." The silence in the auditorium was profound. Rachel could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, but she kept her gaze steady. "Let's be the adults our children need us to be. Let's show them what real strength looks like. Let's create a school, a community, where every child can thrive, where kindness isn't seen as weakness, and where speaking up for what's right is celebrated." She saw Ethan sitting straighter in his chair, his eyes shining with pride. In that moment, every doubt, every fear, every sleepless night felt worth it. "Thank you," she concluded softly, "for listening, for being here, and for being part of this change." The applause started slowly, then built until it filled the auditorium. Rachel saw several people standing, including Greg, who had tears in his eyes. But the only face she really saw was Ethan's, beaming at her from his seat, clapping harder than anyone else in the room. The auditorium hummed with nervous energy as Rachel finished her heartfelt speech. Her voice, though slightly shaky at first, had grown stronger with each word about dignity, respect, and the power of standing up for what's right. Parents and students sat in rapt attention, many nodding in agreement, some dabbing at their eyes with tissues. Just as Rachel was about to step away from the podium, movement in the wings caught her attention. Greg Whitmore emerged from the shadows, his usually pristine suit looking somewhat rumpled, as if he'd been fidgeting with it. His face wore an expression she'd never seen before, a mixture of determination and vulnerability that made him look more human than she'd seen him in years. "If I may," Greg said quietly, approaching the microphone. Rachel hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside, her heart pounding against her ribs. The audience stirred with surprise. Greg Whitmore rarely attended school functions unless they involved fundraising or formal ceremonies. Yet here he was, gripping the podium with both hands, his knuckles white with tension. "I've spent most of my life believing that success was about maintaining an image," Greg began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "About keeping up appearances and protecting what I thought mattered most: reputation, status, control." He paused, swallowing hard. "I was wrong." Rachel watched from the side of the stage as Greg's gaze swept across the audience, lingering briefly on Chase, who sat rigid in his seat, then moving to Ethan in the front row. The boy's eyes were wide with wonder and uncertainty. "When Mrs. Carter spoke about courage today, she demonstrated something I've lacked for far too long," Greg continued, his voice growing stronger. "The courage to admit when we're wrong. The courage to stand up not just for our own children, but for every child who needs an advocate." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Even the usual shuffling of feet and rustling of papers had ceased. Parents leaned forward in their seats, and teachers stood along the walls, listening intently. "I watched my own son participate in behavior that goes against everything we should be teaching our children," Greg admitted, his shoulders straightening as if shedding a heavy weight. "And worse, when confronted with it, I dismissed the concerns of a mother fighting for her child's dignity. I let my pride and fear of losing face dictate my actions." Rachel felt her throat tighten as she remembered that day in the parking lot, the sting of his dismissal, the fury and helplessness she'd felt. But now, watching him bare his soul to the entire school community, she saw a different man entirely. This school, Greg gestured around him, should be a place where every child feels safe, valued, and respected, regardless of their background or circumstances. But that won't happen unless we, as adults, as parents, as community leaders, make it happen. He turned slightly, acknowledging Rachel with a respectful nod. "Mrs. Carter's initiative isn't just about stopping bullying. It's about creating an environment where kindness and integrity matter more than social status or family names." In the front row, Ethan's face had transformed from uncertainty to a brilliant smile. He sat up straighter, his eyes bright with pride and hope. Next to him, Chase shifted in his seat. But his expression showed something new, understanding, perhaps even remorse. "I'm standing here today not just to support this initiative, but to publicly acknowledge my own failures and commit to doing better," Greg continued, his voice carrying a warmth that few had ever heard from him. "I'm asking everyone in this room to join me. Let's create a community where our children learn that true strength lies not in putting others down, but in lifting them up." The first person to stand was, surprisingly, Chase. He rose from his seat, face flushed but determined. Then Ethan stood, beaming. Like a wave, others followed. Parents, teachers, students, until the entire auditorium was on its feet. The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous crescendo. Rachel watched as Greg stepped back from the podium, looking simultaneously exhausted and relieved. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, she saw the echo of the young man she'd known that summer so long ago. before ambition and expectations had hardened him. Through the noise and movement, Rachel's gaze found Ethan again. He was still standing, clapping with enthusiasm, his face glowing with an emotion that went beyond simple happiness. It was the look of someone who finally felt seen, valued, and protected, not just by his mother, but by an entire community that was choosing to stand up and do better. The principal made her way to the podium as the applause began to die down, ready to wrap up the assembly. But the energy in the room had shifted dramatically. What had started as a simple anti-bullying initiative had transformed into something more profound. A moment of genuine change, sparked by one mother's courage and amplified by an unexpected ally's willingness to change. Rachel stepped back, letting the magnitude of what had just happened wash over her. The voices of students and parents filled the auditorium with a new kind of excitement, not the hollow chatter of social niceties, but the genuine warmth of a community coming together for something important. From where she stood, she could see parents already forming groups, talking animatedly about next steps and volunteer opportunities. Teachers were nodding and smiling, some making notes on their phones or tablets. The seeds of real change were taking root before her eyes. Greg had moved to stand near Chase, his hand resting gently on his son's shoulder. The boy looked up at his father with a mixture of surprise and respect, as if seeing him in a new light. Nearby, Ethan's smile hadn't dimmed one bit. If anything, it had grown brighter as he watched the positive reaction rippling through the crowd. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows as Rachel refilled coffee cups, humming softly to herself. It had been 3 weeks since the assembly, and she could feel the difference in the air, like the whole world had shifted ever so slightly on its axis. "More coffee, Mrs. Carter?" asked Mr. Peterson, one of her regular customers. His smile was warmer than usual, his eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine friendliness. "That speech you gave at the school, my daughter Sarah hasn't stopped talking about it." Rachel felt her cheeks warm as she topped off his cup. "That's kind of you to say." "No, really," he insisted, setting down his newspaper. "It took guts to stand up there and say what needed saying. This town could use more folks like you." These moments kept happening. Small, but meaningful shifts in how people treated her. Where before she'd often felt invisible, now people met her eyes, offered genuine smiles, stopped to chat. Later that afternoon, Rachel pulled into the school parking lot for pickup, noticing how different it felt from that confrontation with Greg months ago. Parents waved as she walked past. Mrs. Thompson, who'd barely acknowledged her existence before, actually stopped to ask about Ethan's progress in math class. As she waited, Rachel watched the school doors, remembering how Ethan used to rush out, head down, trying to make himself invisible. Now the doors burst open, and kids poured out in their usual after-school chaos. Ethan emerged with Chase beside him, both boys laughing about something in Chase's notebook. "Mom," Ethan called out, his voice carrying across the playground without a trace of his old hesitation. "Is it okay if Chase comes over to work on our science project?" Rachel nodded, unable to hide her smile at the sight of her son's newfound confidence. Chase, who once towered over Ethan with meanness, now stood beside him as an equal, his previous arrogance replaced by something softer, more genuine. "Thanks, Mrs. Carter," Chase said as the boys approached. "My dad said he can pick me up at 5 if that's okay." The change in Chase was perhaps the most surprising transformation of all. The day after the assembly, he'd approached Ethan before class, shoulders hunched, hands stuffed in his pockets. Rachel had heard about it later from Mrs. Jenkins, Ethan's homeroom teacher, who'd witnessed the whole thing. "I'm really sorry," Chase had said, his voice cracking slightly. "For everything. I was being a jerk because, well, there's no good reason. But I want to make it right." Ethan, true to his nature, had accepted the apology with immediate grace. "Want to sit together at lunch?" he'd offered, and just like that, a friendship began to grow from the ashes of their past conflict. At home that afternoon, Rachel watched the boys spread their science materials across the kitchen table. Poster board, markers, and a stack of library books about the solar system. They worked together seamlessly, Chase suggesting ideas while Ethan sketched out designs, neither boy showing any trace of their former roles as bully and bullied. "Mom, can you help us spell Neptune?" Ethan called out, completely at ease. Rachel smiled, remembering how he used to whisper even at home, as if afraid to take up space in the world. The doorbell rang at 5 o'clock sharp. Greg stood there, looking more casual than usual in jeans and a polo shirt. "How'd the project go, boys?" "Great," both Chase and Ethan chorused, holding up their half-finished poster. "We're doing the outer planets," Chase explained enthusiastically. "Ethan's really good at drawing the rings around Saturn." Rachel noticed how Greg's eyes softened as he watched the boys interact. There was none of his old judgment or superiority, just genuine pleasure at seeing his son happy and kind. The changes weren't just at school or in public spaces. Rachel noticed them in Ethan's demeanor at home, too. He walked taller, laughed more freely, and talked about his day without prompting. His nightmares about school had stopped, and his grades were improving steadily. One evening as they sat doing dishes together, Ethan suddenly said, "You know what Chase told me today? He said he used to act mean because he thought that's what cool kids were supposed to do, but now he thinks being nice is cooler." Rachel paused, soap suds dripping from her hands. "That's pretty wise for a 10-year-old. "Yeah," Ethan agreed, carefully drying a plate. "And you know what else? Some of the other kids who used to ignore me are being nice now, too. Like Jenny Martinez asked me to be in her study group, and Michael invited me to his birthday party next weekend." The community's transformation extended beyond just the children. Rachel noticed more parents, including her in their conversations at school events. She was invited to join the PTA's planning committee, and her suggestions were met with genuine consideration rather than polite dismissal. Even Vanessa, who tried so hard to hurt them with her public accusations, had been notably subdued since the assembly. Rachel occasionally caught her watching Ethan and Chase playing together, an unreadable expression on her face. At the diner, regular customers now asked about Ethan by name, genuinely interested in his progress. Her manager, noting her improved confidence, offered her a promotion to shift supervisor. "You've always been a hard worker," he said, "but lately you've really shown leadership qualities." The most profound changes were the quiet ones, the way Ethan now bounded out of bed in the morning, eager for school. How he talked about his future with excitement instead of anxiety. The easy way he moved through spaces that had once felt threatening. One afternoon, Rachel watched from the sidelines as Ethan and Chase played soccer during recess. Other kids gravitated toward their game, and soon there was a full match happening, with Ethan and Chase naturally organizing teams and making sure everyone got to play. Mrs. Jenkins came to stand beside her. "It's remarkable," she said softly. "We talk about ending bullying, but what you and Greg did, showing the children how adults can acknowledge mistakes and change, that made more impact than any anti-bullying poster ever could." Rachel watched her son laugh and play, his face glowing with joy and confidence. She thought about how far they'd come from those dark days of whispered confessions and tearful nights. The community hadn't just accepted them, it had embraced them, proving that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand your ground with grace and dignity. The school gymnasium buzzed with excitement, filled with the familiar scent of cardboard display boards and nervous energy. Rachel adjusted her name tag, Ethan Carter's mom, and weaved through the crowd of parents and students gathered for the annual spring science fair. Trifold presentations lined the tables, some wobbling precariously under the weight of elaborate experiments. She spotted Ethan at his station, carefully straightening his effects of different liquids on plant growth display for the 100th time. His button-down shirt was neatly tucked in, his hair combed with unusual precision. Rachel's heart swelled at the sight of him, confident, focused, and completely in his element. "He's been practicing his presentation all morning," came a familiar voice. Greg stood beside her, holding 2 paper cups of punch from the refreshment table. He offered one to Rachel with a gentle smile. "Chase says he wouldn't shut up about it during lunch." Rachel accepted the drink, noting how natural it felt now, this careful friendship they'd built over the past few months. "Thanks." He was up at dawn, double-checking his data charts. I had to practically force him to eat breakfast. They watched as one of the judges approached Ethan's table. The boy straightened his shoulders and launched into his carefully rehearsed explanation, pointing to each of his plants with steady hands. His voice carried clearly across the crowded space, strong and sure. "He's like a different kid," Greg murmured, shaking his head in wonder. "Remember how quiet he used to be?" Rachel nodded, thinking back to those difficult days that now felt like a distant memory. The whispers had died down, replaced by genuine acceptance. Chase and Ethan had become unlikely friends, Their former troubles transformed into shared jokes and soccer matches. More parents filled the gymnasium as the judging continued. Rachel noticed how they smiled and waved at her now. Genuine warmth in their greetings. No more sideways glances or hushed conversations. She'd earned her place here, not through wealth or status, but through standing up for what was right. The principal approached the microphone, tapping it twice. "If I could have everyone's attention, please. The judges have made their decisions." Rachel held her breath. Beside her, Greg crossed his fingers dramatically, making her laugh despite her nerves. They moved closer to Ethan's table, where he stood fidgeting with his display cards. Third place goes to Sarah Peterson for her study on local water quality. Applause filled the room. Ethan's fingers drummed against the table edge. Second place is awarded to Michael Chang for his investigation of sound waves. More clapping. Rachel reached for Ethan's hand, giving it a squeeze. And first place in this year's 6th grade science fair goes to Ethan Carter for his comprehensive study on the effects of different liquids on plant growth. The gymnasium erupted in cheers. Ethan's eyes went wide, his mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. Rachel pulled him into a tight hug as Greg clapped enthusiastically beside them. Through her happy tears, she could see Chase jumping up and down, whooping louder than anyone. "Way to go, buddy." Greg's hand came down gently on Ethan's shoulder as the boy clutched his blue ribbon. "That was some presentation you gave." Ethan beamed, his face flushed with pride. "Did you see my control group? I made sure to account for all the variables, just like you suggested, Mr. Whitmore." Rachel watched their interaction with a full heart. Greg had become a steady presence in Ethan's life, not trying to replace anyone, just offering friendship and guidance when needed. It was more than she could have hoped for during those dark days months ago. After the ceremony, parents and students began packing up their projects. The late afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, casting long golden rectangles across the gymnasium floor. Rachel helped Ethan carefully wrap his plants in newspaper for the drive home. "Mom?" Ethan asked, carefully tucking his ribbon into his pocket. "Can we go to the diner? To celebrate?" "I think that calls for pie," Rachel said, ruffling his hair. "What do you say, fellow scientist?" Ethan grinned, already heading for the door. "Race you to the car!" They stepped out into the spring sunshine together, the warm air carrying the scent of newly cut grass and possibility. Greg waved goodbye from his car, where Chase was already buckled in, both of them offering final congratulations. Rachel watched Ethan practically skip across the parking lot, his award-winning project clutched carefully in his arms. She thought about the long journey that had brought them here. The tears, the confrontations, the courage it took to stand up and speak out. Somehow, they'd turned those painful moments into stepping stones towards something beautiful. "Mom, come on," Ethan called, bouncing on his toes by their old sedan. "I can taste that apple pie already." Rachel laughed, picking up her pace. Okay, just don't tell Linda I let you have dessert before dinner." "Are you kidding? Linda's probably got a whole pie set aside for her favorite customer." Ethan's eyes sparkled with mischief. "She always says I'm growing too fast for my own good anyway." They climbed into the car, both giggling at the thought of Linda's motherly fussing. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, a perfect backdrop for their victory celebration. As Rachel started the engine, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. They'd done more than just survive. They'd shown what was possible when you face challenges with hope and determination. Ethan clutched his ribbon the whole way to the diner, occasionally holding it up to catch the light. His happiness filled the car like sunshine, warm and bright and absolutely unstoppable. Rachel couldn't stop smiling, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was their story now. Not one of being victims or outcasts, but of rising above, of finding strength in unexpected places, of building bridges instead of walls. As they pulled into the diner's parking lot, their laughter mingling with the cheerful ding of the bell above the door, Rachel knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Rachel Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please, don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.